Good afternoon. The June 27th, 2023 board work session is now in order. Roll call, please, Paul.
Mr. Susan.
Here.
Miss Wright.
Here.
Miss Jenkins.
Here.
Miss Campbell.
Here.
Mr. Trent.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First topic is Board Policy 8600, Transportation. You have the floor, Mr. Miller.
Good afternoon, Board. Good afternoon, Board. Is it on?
Yeah, you got karaoke close to your face.
Good afternoon, Board members. Policy 8600, Transportation. We have elected to go with the Neola addition with just a couple of changes. If you look at number 10, it says a reasonable distance, and we put 1.5 miles because that goes with state statute. And then if you look at number 5D, that said elementary students, and we've changed it to students. So if we want somebody from middle school or high school to be a fee-based student, they can do that. Those were the two changes we made.
Sorry, which one's?
Okay. If you look at number 5D,
So I think it's actually number 6. It's not 5D any longer on
no, it's
the.
no, we changed 5D to number 6.
Okay. Oh, you gotta go back up to the red line.
The difference being
It's on
between,
page 18.
the difference in the policy is where it says in the,
We
correct,
removed
remove
elementary.
elementary
It just
and
says
added
students.
students.
It just added more students.
I had one, I think it's an easy question. It was more curiosity than anything because I don't think I realized this before. There's something in there about 55 miles an hour. Oh, yeah. 14 R. It said something about drive always at a safe speed, never more than legally posted speed limit in business or residential districts, or 55 miles per hour outside a business or residential district. Does that mean our buses can never go more than 55 miles an hour?
It's just in an area.
Huh?
It's just speed limit area.
Oh, okay. So if they're on the highway,
They can go faster.
they can go faster. Okay.
If they're on
I would read
95.
that like 5 times. I'm trying to figure out. It says it's outside a business or residential district. So, okay. All right.
County pulls down all their speed limits, that's the limit they have to do. So if they hit a country road and they don't know 55 is where they're supposed to.
Okay. If it's not posted. Okay. Gotcha. Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions on this? Good? Okay, thank you, Dr. Miller. Appreciate the comment. Next topic is elementary reading and learning budget presentation. Ms. Klein.
Wait, I thought there was something in between that.
No, I think it's the next thing is student services.
Okay.
So board members, if you just bear with us as we try this new format. The presenters are going to be given the option to present from the table or from the podium,
Okay.
whichever one they feel more comfortable with. We switched this format so we could have more of a discussion, in a workshop instead of being up on the dais and all that. So that's the whole idea.
Thank you. Yes.
Good afternoon. Am I on? So I'm going to go quickly through the elementary reading and learning budget. And you all know our current org structure. And this is the actual budget for my department, which consists of myself, my administrative assistant, and a 12-month AP, and also part of our jointly shared budget analyst. So $7,000 for operations of elementary reading and learning. This breaks down just the different components of what we do. The majority of our money goes to, as you have seen this for a week now, summer work, copy machines, in-county travel for our directors and for school visits. We do a whole lot of school visits, as you would anticipate. 9250 is testing, accountability, and evaluation. A very, very, very small department. Should absolutely be larger. I've always advocated for more people. We need people who actually analyze the data instead of just manage the data process. That department has $9,950 worth of operations. However, we also have money into all of the components of the testing. One of the big pieces of a budget for us is the shredding of testing materials. That is something we have to take care of. We can't have those things out. We also have conferences and state-required meetings. As you know, NADA serves on many state meetings, committees, and that is a benefit to us because she gets firsthand information. 9210, Ms. Harris, who is not with us today. Part of my team is here. Ms. Harris is actually in Italy today, but we won't hold that against her. This is the current configuration for Ms. Harris. A position in here, the coordinator of RAISE, Alyssa Copeland, is currently holding that position. That position is being paid through ESSER. That is a new state-required position. So that will be something that we'll have to look forward to in the future, and that is for the reading for schools that are not reading at the level that the state that we need to be. Also part of this is Marilyn Chappie, who's right over here in the audience. Marilyn is our early childhood director, also principal supervisor, and then her team. Dr. Roberts, who's not with us because she's in Africa today.
Oh, man.
This is her team. You know, one of the things that in 9210 with Dr. Roberts that I have wanted to get off the ground, but we haven't done that, was some changes in our process for choice and charter. I believe we could do a lot better holistically if we make some switches, and we've been working to that since I took over this responsibility. And with Dr. Roberts, she has a great vision of how we can make this better for all students and all families. Dr. Melinda Mayer is an amazing leader, and she is a data guru. If you need a spreadsheet done, she can do it before you turn around twice, and she analyzes everything around charter. So the three of the, and part of Dr. Mella, who is here with us as well, part of their operating budget is all out of 9210. So all four of them work under that component. And if you can see in the detailed report, most of this is for professional development, which we now call professional learning, early childhood equipment, teacher work, summer work, in 00038, which is early childhood. We do a lot for kindergarten readiness and getting kindergarten set up. So we spent a lot of money, well, $1,000, but it's a lot of money in our world, on getting those packets ready for kindergarten. Again, in-county travel, out-of-state and in-state. The cell phone expenses, thank goodness we can have cell phones, so that we're not using our personal cell phones for work. And this again is more summer work. As I've shared with you before, each year we review the pacing guides. We change pacing guides based on opinions from our teachers. We want to make sure the materials and the timing of instruction meets what our teachers need. So they work, and if you had been down in our area a couple weeks ago, the science team was working hard at redoing some pacing. Another thing that, and I know Ms. Campbell asked this, and I'll get to it in a minute, but our content specialists are 10-month employees. They work primarily the whole entire month of June. It has been my request for several years to make content specialists, resource teachers 11 months. If we're already paying them, why not make it 11 months? Because that they're working, and then we wouldn't be paying, you know, all the extra time for them to come in and work. It would just be part of their job description. 9810 is also shared by Chappie and Harris. Again, it's the same world. This is where we do a lot with Space Week, elementary math, zoo school, all of that summer work that we continue to try to bring school a very happy place for children to be ready to learn. And again, one of the things that will have to be a decision, every year we pay for Southern Association, which is actually now Cognia. If we ask for 4 years, so that be changed to Cognia. Maybe next year it'll be there. Cognia is our accreditation process, and that is to accreditate our schools to be nationally recognized. And so it is something that we very much look forward to that process. And if you've all seen the report, our report was very high. We showed great growth in that. Marilyn Chappie actually leads that work, and she attends the annual Cognia training and keeps up to date on the next process. We have a few more years before we have to go through accreditation. However, we pay a membership fee every year. Again, summer work, curriculum development, summer work, curriculum development. It's the same story, just a lot of strings telling the same thing. So just wants to highlight some things. I've already addressed Cognia. That is something that I know other districts, I know Dr. Cody was shocked that we had accreditation because Seminole wasn't accredited district-wide. I believe in it, but it would be, it really bodes well for our students to come from an accredited district. I know when I was looking for my master's program, I wanted it from an accredited college. So accreditation is very, very important. Ms. Campbell asked me, what's the difference between a content specialist and a resource teacher? So about 8 years ago, maybe, there was a move to go away from the title of a resource teacher. Resource means this is somebody you can call, right? But what does a content specialist? I am a specialist in ELA. I can model it, I know it, I can talk the language, I can coach it. So the content, that is their love, that is their focus. A resource, yeah, I can be a resource. If you look at the RACI chart, you know, we can be a resource for lots of things. But when you're a content, that is your focus. You are truly focused on that work. There was also a shift in the supplement. So we went from resource to content. Last year, we were able to bring back a supplement for these content specialists, but truly it is similar work, but more focused work. And I know when I had the opportunity to step into this current role, I believe our content specialists, resource teachers, we still have a few that are resource teachers, their responsibility is not sitting in this building, right? their responsibility is out supporting teachers, whether it's modeling, whether it's coaching, whether it's professional learning. That is their responsibility, to be out there. So I got lots of pushback. No, I am a resource to be here. Pick up the phone and call me. That's not my philosophy. We're in the field supporting the schools. So that was a paradigm shift that we made, and so I truly believe it has bode well for our students and our teachers to have people in the field. When we as a team walk a school and we see something that needs more support, needs more modeling, we know exactly who to call, who to come back to and say, hey, so-and-so, I need you to go to this school, I need you to go to this classroom, I need you to work with these teachers. And that is the magic of it, is when we can build that and say, okay, I saw it, it needs some help, let's go do it. So that's the work of our content and resource teachers. They also attend the one-day elementary AP meeting, and they present all new materials. Or refresh on old materials. So they are there. They work. The Pod 3 team is an amazing team supporting our schools. Science, it's summer work, and we do the science education. Dr. Sullivan touched on that before, of how we distribute this money to the schools. Math enhancement, we had a reduction in some of our Title II funding, so we added more support. Currently, we have 7 math instructional coaches that we deploy. We made a grid based on math performance, and they go and support schools. Some schools get once a week, some get every other week. So based on the school needs and the math and what we see when we walk the school, we decide how much support they get, and then if they need more support. We still have 1 vacancy in that math coach. Those math coaches are being funded through ESSER. And as you see, we spend a lot on travel. Now, our 8 math coaches, they are deployed to schools, but when they move from one school to another, if they move through the day, we pay mileage for them, of course. Any staff that's housed here every day, we encourage them to use the fleet vehicles so that we're not accumulating mileage. Same thing with the directors. If they can use a fleet vehicle, that is where we try to put that. And then also part of us is Dr. Ivory, who is, she has performance data and Brevard Aftercare. You all know quite a bit about Brevard Aftercare, but it is a self-sustaining group. We came in with a huge negative a couple years ago, and we are pleased that we are coming out of that negative. I still believe that we're going to need to have a fee increase, and it needs to happen soon because we are still the most economic program in the county, and it's costing a lot for salaries. So, and we have to meet all the child care rules for that. Also, performance data, Dr. John Carr, who is phenomenal. Dr. Carr is our only analyst. He does run our Performance Matters, and I know that Dr. Sullivan shared with you about Performance Matters. We are looking to bridge over into Focus. However, there's a component that Focus doesn't have, and that is when we want to upload a teacher-made or a district-made assessment and make that part of the portfolio, we don't have that ability through Focus. So Dr. Carr, under my work with him, we are trying to find a program that will work alongside Focus and meet that need for our teachers. So that is probably a year ahead from us, but Dr. Carr could sure use some support. He does a lot of analysis for everyone, but one person. And then this is the self-funded BAS program. So we are moving ahead, still not where I want to be, but we've made great growth. Also part of our department is our Title I. Dr. Mella is sitting right back here. Dr. Mella, she puts together the Title I plan, implements that, follows all the guidelines of that. Dr. Mella also has school improvement under her hat and MTSS, and so it's an interesting connection. And then Wendy Smith has our Head Start, and you've heard from Wendy and all the great stuff that goes on in Head Start. And Wendy's here with us too. So I want to talk, just so you know, about split funded. So these three people are split funded, or Miss Chappie's tri-funded, I guess. So it is a funding source, so we don't impact Fund 100 as much as we try to eliminate that. So we are working toward split funding so we can save Fund 100. We also split fund 15 content or resource teachers. So they might be funded at 80-20 or different ways, but most of them are 80-20, but we split fund 15 people. Now what that means is we have to account for where they are. So they have to do a form each month to tell, have they actually been working in Title I schools? Have they actually been doing the things that we need to do? Because the one thing we do not want to do is supplant and get into trouble federally. So one of the other things that you may not be aware of that's split funded is our literacy coaches. Literacy coaches are funded either through Title I, some are funded through the Title II, so that we're not touching but a portion of Fund 100. So schools say, oh, I have to pay 50% of my Title I funds for my literacy coach. Well, not really. We give them 50% more of that salary so that they don't. So it's added on to their budget. So some of those things have really been working to save Fund 100. We've continued to tweak this each year so that we can save Fund 100. And so these are some things that after this coming school year that you're going to have to consider. How are we funding? iReady and Penda Science are both being funded through ESSER dollars right now, as is the RAISE coordinator and the math coaches. Those are all items that after this coming school year will no longer be unless you as the board decide to fund them. Questions? It's a budget that won't exist after July 1.
Anybody have any questions to this point they'd like to bring up? Ms. Jenkins?
So I commend the effort to not touch Fund 100 with all of the split funding, but just in your opinion, because I have some experience with that, unfortunately, working in the pre-K EAC department, and I know how complex that can be. Do you feel like that's a sustainable way for us to continue? Do you see that we need to make a shift in order to not have to do that going forward?
No, I actually think it does work.
Okay.
I think it does work, and what it also does, it ensures that if all your time is only spent in a Title I school, that's all you see. If all your time is spent in a non-Title I school, that's where your paradigm is. So by split funding, we also split their services. So I see a school that's not Title I and their work and the way of the work. And then I see a Title I school. So in my mind as a content specialist or as a director or anything else, I see the whole picture of BPS. And so we're not siloing people, we're seeing the whole picture.
No, the resource teacher versus content specialist, that was my question. So I'm glad, thank you for answering that, because I was going to ask it. Because I had a vague memory of it explanation before. I just thought it would be good for us to know. So thank you for that. And thank you for listing these items, because as you were talking, we have talked several times over the last couple of years, hey, we have this funding cliff, but it would probably be good for the board over this coming year, Dr. Rendell, to really get that whole list. Some things, like the summer programming we were talking about, I mean, we don't have funding for that, but that's, clear what that is. And, PPE, at some point we stopped buying masks. I'm assuming we're not buying masks and cleaning supplies as much but there are things that are essential, and that the board, so as early as we can get that list, right, and that some of the cabinet members have been mentioning those things all along, but so that we can start thinking about those items. And I know some of that happened because we had such a reduction in students right off the bat that we did some of those things because they were allowable, and we were worried about reduced funding because of fewer students. We've been able to recover some of that. So as we move over the next year, Dr. Rendell, would you kind of help us kind of get that list all together so that we know what are those big decisions we're going to have to make coming up in the next budget cycle?
Yeah, we actually had a bit of a discussion about this in cabinet on Monday, yesterday. A little bit about when do we start weaning ourselves off some of those non-recurring funds.
Right.
So we're going to have to get ready for that when those extra funds, so to speak, aren't there anymore.
Right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
And you have to keep your eye on changes with the state. With, we have 3 CS&I schools in elementary, and that is Endeavor, Creel, and Oak Park. Oak Park wasn't on the list at the beginning of the school year. Not because they didn't qualify, but the state didn't find them in their data dig and then found them. And so there are requirements under the race coordinator and the Bureau of School Improvement, which you've heard me speak about numerous times, that have to happen. And then TS&I. So those schools have certain requirements. So
And we don't get extra funding for that. We get some for turnaround schools, right?
Well, we don't have any schools in official turnaround right now, but we have 3 in CS&I, and they get additional funding.
Okay, do good. Okay. But like the race coordinator, we can't not do that, right? Every district has to have that.
Well, they'll have some type of work covering that. Doesn't have to be a race coordinator. That was the name we came up with because that's a focus of that. And that is also part of that is the high school tutors, that we're able to hire the tutors.
Right, so coming over to the elementary schools, which what's the success of that?
I don't have all the data with me, but it's been very successful. We had a slow start, but once we got the people on board and the kids on board and they learned the responsibility, Alyssa Copeland has done amazing work leading that cause.
Thank you.
Yeah, I had a couple questions. So you mentioned the content specialists being 10-month employees right now, and they're working 11 months. Is that something previous boards have discussed as far as talking about changing them to an 11-month employee versus a 10-month employee?
It's been a long time if it has. I know we've talked about it at the senior cabinet level.
Okay, and how many approximate people? I mean, I was trying to go through and count them on each of the slides, and I'm like, are we talking here?
I would have to go back and
I know,
check.
I was looking and trying to count them. I think it's less than 20 when I totaled them all up.
I think it's close to 27.
Is there? Okay, if they were all listed on this PowerPoint, or maybe.
Yeah, they're
not, so-
somewhere. They're in there. One. Yes.
Okay, all right, so they're not all of them there. If the funding was not split funded the way that it is right now, would that permit more time to dedicate to a specific, because I feel like with the split funding, there's different requirements, right? Obviously for each of those funding sources.
Well, the funding source, if you're split funded, you have to spend, if you're 20% for Title I,
Yeah.
then you have to spend 20% of your time working on Title I schools.
Okay. And how much time do you think that these poor individuals are doing trying to track down their timing? And is that it?
It's not hard to track because that's where their work is.
Okay, all right.
Yeah,
It just
yeah.
sounds like it would be very encumbersome for them to try to
No.
figure out, hey, 20% of my time this month needs to show to this or that, and that's,
They very much are meeting that.
okay, good.
And
Good.
more.
The Cognia that you spoke about, you had said that there are some surrounding counties that don't have this accreditation. How many counties have
I
this?
don't know, but I know Dr. Cody was shocked that we were a district-wide accredited district.
Okay, I'm curious to know how many statewide have this.
I don't know.
Um,
Or don't have it, because the majority do.
Majority do have it. Okay,
Oh,
that's,
yeah.
that's why I wasn't
No,
sure.
the majority do. I was quite taken aback that Seminole, I was like, what? She goes, no, we allow certain schools to be accredited, but we don't accredit as a whole district,
Okay,
which was shocking to me.
So just to share, so an individual school could be accredited. It's a lot of work to prepare for an accreditation site visit. So several years ago, this district decided to do it district-wide and be district accredited. I was in the district when we switched from school accreditation to district accreditation. So it takes a lot of the work off the schools, but puts a lot of the work on central office staff and some schools, because those of you that were on the board when we were last visited for a site accreditation visit, they will go visit schools. So certain schools will have to expend some man-hour and time, to do that. But it is probably a less intrusive process if the district pursues district accreditation versus school accreditation.
okay.
And it kind of forces you to adopt a district-wide standard. This is what you expect at your schools, and this is, kind of our way of doing things and stuff like that. So district accreditation is not something I would want to walk away from.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Part of that also, Ms. Wright, is that it makes certain that part of the accountability is we know not only our school improvement plan, that it's a working document, but the strategic plan as well. So it brings that whole, if you want to call it a golden thread between our work and the school work, and so it's not isolating everyone. So district accreditation, and Cognia has streamlined it every year. It's more streamlined when they give the report of how they're going to do the accreditation cycle. It is more streamlined and more focused on what really matters, and that's student outcomes.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Trenton, do you have any questions?
Just one, how many, and it's in here, I know, how many resource and content specialists do we have in the district? You just said content, both combined.
I don't have the exact number.
No.
I think I'm around 27, but I don't know how many in secondary and how many in student services, so.
Okay, no, that's fine. Everything else, great detail.
Thank you. Just had a couple of questions. We talked about the fee increase for Aftercare. When you do that, if you'll compare it to other areas for the new board members, because I know when we brought that forward before, we were significantly lower.
We still are.
And just so everybody understands, we always try to take care of our staff in those kind of situations with, and then the public. So when you bring that forward, if you can just make sure that those components are inside there. The other thing is that those 11-month, the transfer of the job description, you had mentioned that we're already paying for it. So is that going to be, the 11-month is going to be an extra for, say, 27 people or whatever it is, if we had one extra month? Are they already getting paid to where that money would just, it's just a job description?
Yes.
Okay, so it's not a huge financial drop. It may be some because of,
It may save our district
Yeah, it
money.
depends on the funding source that we're paying for the extra month out of.
yeah, okay.
And some of that, some of that, this last couple years, we've used ESSER to pay for some of that extra time in the summer, correct? So we have to,
Yeah.
that adds a chink in the mix or whatever. I'm mixing metaphors.
Because there's a lot, like, our athletic directors have to now, because of FHSAA rules, come in almost 3 weeks early to start running. Like this,
It's just becoming to where our 10-month is no longer a position, it's becoming 11 months. So it's consistent with many of the other areas.
And we need to also consider, since I'm here, this is my last time in front of you.
Maybe.
No, it is. No doubt about it, buddy. 11-month elementary APs.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%.
That is,
Actually wrote that down when you talked about the content specialist.
we have to, that is a
At least.
11-month job at least. And so we're paying most of them this summer to work. And it is, anyone who's been a principal knows that AP, I mean, when I was AP, I worked the entire summer and didn't get paid a penny, but that was who I am. But we need to be paying our people for their work, and they are working every day.
And that's consistent, and I know everybody knows that in the elementary schools, we're pretty thin at the locations with the principals because we usually only have a principal and an assistant principal. It's one of the things that Dr. Mullins and I were going around and around about the millage is I was saying that we need to put in another admin inside the schools rather than IAs everywhere because they would be able to deal with discipline more. So, no, I agree with you wholeheartedly. If there's a way that when these come forward, if there's a cost, you know what I mean, if we can just make sure that they're inside there. The other thing is that just so everybody understands, those summer opportunities that we're providing, which are amazing, part of the conversation that we will be having with each one of the cities when we go to meet with their municipalities is they already have summer programs that they're putting together, and they really wanted to collaborate with us. So there might be some cross-functional funding that we're able to utilize, where the city would actually help fund some of those inside of our schools for the summer programs because they have aftercare and stuff like that and summer programs that they're trying to do, and they're always looking for better options. So it might be an opportunity for us. The other thing that I wanted to bring up is this right here. Do we have a total cost on each one of these? I remember iReady just from being in the past. But
Yeah.
right, but what
Very
I'm saying is do we have like what it's going to cost for the 24-25 because the increase will come up, right? So do we have each one of those in a cost for that?
We'll get those for you.
Okay, not a rush. And then the other
If
thing.
you want them from me, it is.
The other thing is that a lot of the times we look at some of the things that are being funded and they're under like Title I, Title II, and all these other things, right? So Dr. Rendell had spoken to me about possibly coming forward with the Title I breakdown of where we're spending and everything else and what projects we're paying for and stuff like that. So just wanted to kind of give you guys the heads up that we might be in the near future being able to get one of those type budget presentations. So, and I think that's all I had.
So the only thing else I want to add is we are, you have that checklist of things you want to get done. I'm very excited that our elementary focus report card is ready to roll.
Okay.
We're not changing kindergarten, but Marilyn will kill me if I change kindergarten. But we have been working with Russ Cheatham's team and Don Bronstein, and we are ready to roll with an elementary focus report card, which I think will be a game changer. And so we have put in the requirements, legislation just changed that not only do we have to identify any child as substantially deficient and speak monthly with their parent, if they're ELA, the added part is the math. So that is a component in the report card as well as part of our progress monitoring that we'll put in place for this fall.
That's exciting.
Everybody good?
Yeah, I just want to do a follow-up to one of the concerns that Ms. Wright had, just because I don't know how often we'll talk about split funding, but just to ease your concern a little bit. So the document, and correct me if I'm wrong in your area, but from my experience, it's a really simple document basically that the employee is signing off saying, yes, I dedicated this much time to that part of my job. And then if they had to go improve it, they can absolutely go back on their schedule and document it, but they're not forced to document every single step that they're
That's what I was
taking.
thinking was happening.
It sounds really extensive, but it's really, really simple. They're just signing a
Yes,
form every
one
month.
piece of paper, it
Yeah.
says da-da-da,
Okay.
80/20, da-da-da.
I
And
was
then
thinking they were
could be asked to
accounting
prove
for
it,
like,
but-
yeah, like the hours they were here and there.
Yeah, I just wanted you to be aware. It's a simple form.
So typically, we have, we track school visits by a Google Doc of every content specialist, every director. We know how much time, that's just part of the way of our work currently, is that we track what schools we're in and what supports we've been providing. And you know, most of you have seen the YAG, the year in a glance that we do with schools that looks at their areas of focus and the areas of support we need to give them. So all that is tracking through our Google Documents.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
All right, if there's nothing else. Thank you so
All
much.
right, you're quite welcome.
Next topic is student services budget presentation.
Yeah, every time.
Every 2 weeks.
Miss Pam, we're gonna see you every time.
Mr. Susan's planning another presentation for you at the next board meeting, Ms. Kim here.
ESE, what do you guys want to know?
No comment.
She's ignoring you, as she should.
You have the floor.
Okay.
Push that microphone.
Good afternoon. I'm here to present the Division of Student Services budget. Just thank you for your patience. My team is here today for support to answer any questions that might come up that I will not be able to answer at that point in time. But we've been working through the budget, and we've been having an overall look at the budget and plan to fine tune for next year. So there's some things that I still have questions about, but we're still fine tuning that. Currently, this is the organizational structure for the Division of Student Services. We have 5 departments, and I'm going to go through each of those budgets today. The first budget is the division budget, which houses my administrative assistant and myself, which consists of about $11,500. And most of that will be spent on school visits because I plan to make sure that I'm out to schools. Copier expenses, supplies, paper, just organizational materials to make sure that we're doing the job effectively. We have Title IX office that was placed up under this office as of, I think it was April or May. And we have Mrs. Sotomayor here to answer any questions pertaining to, we have a membership of $5,250, which is an association of other, I guess, coordinators that you can share best practices with and get additional information to make sure that we're getting professional development or asking other colleagues. Then we have TNG Consulting, which is about $60,000, and that's the legal consulting service that Ms. Sotomayor uses if she has additional questions pertaining to Title IX. And it's my understanding that prior to that, schools would have access to that, but that's no longer the case. We're going to streamline the way we're doing that to make sure that we're actually have a process in place that we can monitor for implementation of those cases. And this is just more specific as to what the budget is, which is an overview of what I just went over, 9260. Next, we have Dr. Fontan, that is mainly 9290, compliance and administration support. This particular department really focuses on our IDAs, making sure that IEPs and our 504s are being done with fidelity at our school site, providing the oversight as well as overseeing fiddlers. The main budget here is 9290, 9815. As you can see, there's about $7,635 for administrative, which is mainly Dr. Fontan's budget to provide PD materials, supplies, in and out of county travel. And we have the same thing for 9815, which is our public and private school. We do a lot of the hospital homebound project. You see that in 9815, that's the bulk of that budget where we provide one-on-one services for our students for hospital homebound. And that's
more specific as to what I just went over. Next, we have Student Services Program Support with Dr. Baez. We have Mrs. Mallory White here. She's the Assistant Director. She's here. Dr. Baez is in Vegas having a great time. We have 92880, which is our ESC. A lot of this is for the copy machine, professional development, supplies. Same thing with ESOL, which is 9816. And then any other extra duty that we require for our ESOL, to plan for ESOL for next year. So as you can see, it's just mainly the office supplies. Majority of our funding is through Title III for ESOL, and then IDEA for our ESC positions and support. So we can write a lot of that in our grant. Next, we have Mrs. Bland. She's the Director of Alternative Site Programs, and this is her current structure. And the bulk of this monies is for our Edgenuity, which is $362,000. This is for our instruction for Gardendale, as well as for any homeschool instruction that we provide for our students with the alternative program. And the rest of this is very limited with supplies, in and out of county travel, et cetera. And that's a bird's eye view of that. And then we have Dr. Jenkins, who's in charge of behavioral, psychological, and mental health services. This is her organizational structure currently. And the bulk of the funds here for 7,100 is $68,000, but the majority of this is for our school psychologists, for their protocols and all of the evaluation, all of the documents for our school sites. And then we have a couple of social workers who are included in here. I think it's about 4 or 5 that are included in here as well. And as you can see, this is much more specific. Same thing. And then we have Mr. Christopher Reed, Systems of Support. This is his current structure. And the bulk of the funds here, Systems of Support, it looks like $3 million, but the majority of that is for our Department of Health, for our nursing programs. And there was an increase in about $620,000, which we had a lot of unfilled positions during COVID that we were able to fill this past year. So that's why you see the increase in that funding source. You'll see it on the next slide. And then the rest is for travel. Then we have Medicaid. We actually use that for Frontline to purchase the contract that was brought forward to you back in May. That's our online PD platform that we'll be utilizing district-wide. And this is his budget. Do you have any questions?
Start over here this time. You have anything?
No.
So, I mean, yeah, there's a lot here to digest, so honestly, going through a lot of it. I think a couple of things that stood out to me, the behavioral text that we have, we need more. There's not enough of them, and I don't know if we've slotted more positions for that, do you have vacancies in that department? I would assume yes, but.
I've had a conversation and I've met with each director along with finance, looking at our current sources of funding and areas that we may want to actually add additional fundings. I know that it has been brought to my attention that the pay for behavior techs needs to be higher. That's why we have a lot of open positions. We have vacancies, but we can't fill them because they're minimum wage. They can go and make more money in Manpower and some of the other companies. That's what I was told last week. So we're going to research that and bring that forward.
Okay, I would be curious to see how many vacancies we have and how many positions we have filled, just so that's something that we might need to look at. The amount of money that we're spending on suicide prevention, this one is probably just, it's a little near and dear because of what I have endured this past school year with losing, well, and one over the summer and one during the school year, middle school students that have committed suicide. And so that's an area that I think we need to be proactive with because there is no reactive strategy to that. So I don't know if there's a way that we can focus attention there on just making sure that we're talking to our kids about these things and walking through that. So, but yeah, I mean, you have a complex budget with a lot of stuff. So thank you for coming. I know you're you're pretty much brand new to come and have to present this to us. Is a lot of information all at one time. So we're glad you're here, but thank you.
I can tell you I've had an opportunity to look at the whole structure of our division, and I've been meeting with staff to go over how we can streamline and really have them focus on a particular area, because right now the way it's situated is like you have 3 or 4 people that have components of behavior, or 2 or 3 people have components of Medicaid here, or behavior is here. So we're really trying to streamline their work to make it laser-like focus. So I'm making some changes with that. So if we have someone focused on discipline, they're focused on discipline. If we have someone that's focused on the mental health and psychological, which is, it's not spread across all of the departments, it is focused in that particular department. So we're really trying to shuffle and make sure it's laser-like focus. So our directors and our staff can really focus on that specific work instead of being, because when I came, every time I asked a question, it was like, oh, I'm thinking that's one director, and it's like, no, that's another department, but then another department, so we're just really trying to make it concise.
That's good, honestly. It's
Yeah.
that a whole jack of all trades, master of
Yes.
none. That's very difficult. So when you're
Yes.
spread thin like that, it's better to laser focus in on one specific area. So that'll be good. That'll help our district. That'll help me. I know when I'm looking for answers, so I appreciate that
Yes.
change.
Ms. Campbell?
Yeah, just bouncing off of Ms. Wright's comments, some of these things, like the suicide prevention, it talks about, there was alternative funding, so it doesn't, it looks like, we're only spending $1,250 on that topic, but some of that, I don't know if some of that came out of ESSER, but I know when we've had the specific state funding for mental health that came, especially after Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, we had those couple of years of bumps. Some of that is specific. Is that in here?
No, we're just focusing on the discretionary.
Right.
I'm still trying to work through. I just got information on the mental health allocation,
Okay.
and who's paid out of that,
Right.
and trying to structure. I like structure to make
Yeah.
sure the fund source is correct. And I've already spoken to Cindy in finance, and we're going to be meeting because it's
Right.
a little confusing.
And that makes it hard because we were talking about split funding for people, but a lot of our programs are split funded too, because we have all these mandates, and some of them got funding and some of them didn't. And so
Absolutely.
like we have to, because we got some of this money was supposed to be. And so we're kind of, it's a good thing is we have funding coming for lots of different directions, but it makes it more complicated when we're looking at the budget, because we can't really tell in this format, this is how much money we're spending on this particular thing, because it's all coming from different directions, right?
And you feel my pain. Yes, and like I said, we focused on this budget. I just got the mental health allocation from Dr. Jenkins, and we're working through that. IDEA, when Dr. Bias comes back, she started that work. I really want to really look at that and flesh that out to make sure that all of the services we're providing, and that if there are additional needs, that we can fund that
Right.
if required.
And this may be more of a Cindy question, but I can't remember off the top of my head, was the mental health, when the legislature put some things that were categoricals into the FEFP, was the mental health allocation one of those that got absorbed into?
It's still a category.
It's still a
in the
categorical,
FEFP,
okay,
yes.
good, thank you.
Yeah.
Ms. Jenkins?
So I just want to highlight that there's many things that you presented as a cost that sometimes pay back and or are really cost effective for preventative purposes. So for instance, the Title IX legal fees of $60,000, it's not necessarily just a consultation service. It's also preventing us from getting sued for millions and millions and millions of dollars by accidentally walking into a Title IX infraction. So pays for itself leaps and bounds ahead of time, as well as programs like the Hospital Homebound for $50,000. We have resources coming back into the district when we are billing Medicaid for that. So you weren't in the room when I had this question previously, so and I apologize because we haven't had our one-on-one yet, but and you don't need to answer this, but just to think about. This is a question I've been asking over and over and over again for the past 2 years, is we really need to take a deep dive look into our Medicaid billing, how much we're bringing in, where we're bringing it in from, where those sources are coming from, and have a conversation as a board and a district, not only bringing that directly back to the schools in which those students are actually housed at, but also to the services that are being provided. Because it's not just our behavior techs that we really need to increase their pay, it's all of our therapy services and our ESC services. And so if we can take a really holistic, deep data dive as to where that money is coming from, then we can have a really genuine conversation about how we can potentially increase the wages for those people who are helping us, as well as our IAs that are in our VE classrooms, things of that nature. I think we need to look at it a little bit differently than we've been looking at it. And then when it comes to our mental health too, again, this is not for something for you to consider right now, but since we're in this conversation, I just want to throw it out there. For the past 2.5 years, we often hear about sources of strength. We heard about how it was successful and helpful in some of our high schools, but then it was kind of falling behind in some of our schools because they didn't necessarily have the support in them. We were also dipping into bringing them into middle schools, and I don't know where we are on that anymore. And so if we can maybe look into where are we, number one, as a baseline. If it is a successful program that we want to continue with, maybe we should have a conversation again. Is that a priority for the board to put a little bit more time, energy, and money towards so that we can actually be successful across all of our schools and not just have one successful school with a program, but hopefully have all of our schools for suicide prevention. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Jenkins. Has Mrs. Onka from the Department of Health reached out to you guys yet? She was speaking.
She reached out to me and I met with her last week.
She had some concerns about some of our nurses and stuff like that, and
Right.
was here addressing
The
all that.
concern was the pay actually for staffing the clinics.
Yeah.
And if we could increase the pay, then they could more fully staff the clinics.
Got it.
So
All
I'll
right.
be bringing that up in a future meeting.
Got it. I just wanted to do my due diligence because
Yeah.
we ran into each other in another meeting. And then I think that's it. Some of the requests that I have will be wrecked around the discipline update. So I'm good with that. Hearing nobody else have anything to say, we can move on to the discipline update.
Difference of 14.
Hot topic.
That's not mine.
Good afternoon again. One of the first items I think was tasked was the Gardendale, and the second was a discipline update. And so we wanted to provide you an update and get feedback as to where we need to go as far as next steps. So, as you can see, we had a couple of community feedback sessions that focused on getting information about recommendations for improving discipline within our schools. And we had a steering committee update from February to March, and that was, it's my understanding, chaired by interim superintendent and district administrators, as well as several principals and teachers from the union and from our support staff union. And then we had a discipline advisory committee that was chaired, my understanding, by Dr. Fontan. They had a session in with district administrators as well as union members. And then Ms. Bland had a feedback session with the assistant principals back in June. I think it was the first day on the job. So she got feedback from the elementary and secondary assistant principals. Currently, we have a progression of corrective actions in our Code of Student Conduct for levels 1 through level 5. As you can see, it gets progressive up to level 4s and 5s. That's when we really get into the out-of-school suspension, the recommendation for the alternative placement, and then recommendation for expulsion. And that's more our higher level at levels 4 and 5. Feedback from the steering committee, they gave us recommendations, and we outlined if there was any impact to that recommendation. The first one was repeated level 1 to 3 offenses, that the principal has the autonomy to actually move to the next level without approval from leading and learning. And that really isn't an impact. That's something where we're giving our principals the authority to do so. Leaving school campus without permission from level 1 to 2, and out of assigned area from level 1 to level 2. It's already, it's my understanding, been initiated within our schools. Was that initiated the fourth 9 weeks? Put in place the fourth 9 weeks. And students may now be suspended out of school for up to 3 days. This is based on House Bill 1521. As you know, that there was a statute now that entering a bathroom or dressing area designated for the sex other than the biological birth gender. We are putting in there that the recommendation is that the code would be willful disobedience if a student was to actually go into the wrong restroom, that they're not, that's not outlined on their birth certificate. We got a new update from the Department of Safe Schools. They define simple battery, which is the new Cessor Level 4 code, and it actually gives us a definition of what simple battery is, and then it gave us examples and non-examples. You can see that the examples is throwing an object, hitting someone hard to cause injury, and then there's a difference between horse playing, where a student is just playing around, hitting and pushing and that kind of thing. And that could also lead to possible physical aggression. And this is one-sided if a kid is doing this and the other kid doesn't want that to occur. The steering committee recommended that we move all 3 levels from pre-K through kindergarten and 1st through 6th and secondary from a level 1 to 3 for pre-K through kindergarten. We would consider simple battery instead of the level 3 incident, which would require ISS or OSS for our babies that are in pre-K and kindergarten. And then moving physical aggression one-sided 1st through 6th from level 3 to 4, and then of course secondary. This would currently level 4 incident will require OSS pending investigation and consider simple battery. So those 2 areas are the ones that the impact would be to consider simple battery if it's one-sided. And that's up for discussion. This is all part of discussion moving forward. Corrective action, the recommendation was to allow the principal to move up a level 1 to 3 for repeated incidents. We've already said that that could be done. Remove out-of-school suspension from level 4, and that would, the impact would be OSS, 2 to 10 days. Pending investigation is the only option that would be for that particular recommendation. Remove in-school suspension from level 4, that can be done and it wouldn't have really a major impact. And move out of signed area, elopement for elementary from a level 1 to 3. The impact would be OSS up to 5 days. And then another recommendation was to add functional behavior assessment, which is our FBA, or the BIP, as corrective action for level 1. And that would be an impact because that would be done, we want to be preventative instead of reactionary. Another recommendation, remove electronic telecommunication device misuse for minor for elementary from a level 1 to a level 2. And all of this you'll see when we go through the recommendation for each level. This particular recommendation for each level is a conflict with board policy, and we're recommending to keep incident at a level 1 with tiers. which would consist of the first confiscation and parent contact. The second level would be second loss of cell phone privileges, and third are any subsequent further corrective actions. So that would be the same for all levels. And then remove financial restitution. That's currently pending in the Code of Conduct. Right. Assistant Principal Committee, this was the information that was gathered. These are minor, really no impact that can be done within the school. Add lunch detention to level 1 and 2, add failure to serve lunch detention to a level 1. And other actions, students will no longer be able to attend the ALC prior to hearing. We really want to make sure that they have due process before they are actually assigned to the alternative center, because that has been happening where they're assigned and they haven't done that. Physical aggression, one-sided versus simple battery. The impact would be physical aggression will offer a lower level infraction when appropriate. And these are minor technical updates to the Code of Conduct that we really could revise. Referral to include previous administrative actions. That is currently administrators only law. Consequences, this will help with problem solving, so that can be adjusted on our focus with the referral process. If a parent contact is logged on referral, automatically right onto student documentation contact log. Now that we've gotten focused, we're really gonna fine-tune procedures and processes, because I did come from a district that was using Focus, and all of these are in place. And I'll talk a little bit more about that on the slide. Further. Discipline Advisory Committee, this was Dr. Fontan. Their recommendation was developed a charter for disciplinary advisory committee outlining governance. And the impact was to serve as an advisory committee to lead of discipline, annually review the Code of Conduct and discipline. That should be done, I think, every year, to make sure that whatever changes in the discipline manual and procedures, so everyone knows what the expectations, including our parents, our students, our administrators, our teachers, that is outlined, and they get trained on that every year, and they know what changes, if any, have been made to that. They also recommended a 15-member team, and that they meet 4 times a year, and that all meetings will be open to the public. This is a document of some procedures that we in my previous district put together, and I have much more that you can look at, because this came up having specific offenses and consequences for students for different our most sensitive areas. And this past year, we got community stakeholder input, worked with school board members, and came up with outline procedures with offenses for cell phone, bullying, vaping, nicotine, even if it's THC, and dress code. So it was outlined so everybody knew in advance of what the expectations were. So administrators, teachers, students, parents, for these hot topic items and frequent incidents. So we're here today to just ask, as far as the Code of Conduct, there has to be some revisions made, and the option A would be to revise with stakeholder feedback all of some of the recommended changes, or option B would be that last slide I just showed you, where you have more specific offenses plus consequences, so it's not a guessing game as to what it should be. But we need direction from the board, because we have to bring the Code of Conduct back to the board for approval. Comments?
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. How do you guys want to proceed? Do you want to go through and give direction here? Do you want to go through the different pieces that she brought up and approve? What do you guys want to do? What's the general feeling?
Got some general questions.
And then we'll get back to it. Sure. All right, sounds good. We'll go to general questions.
I'll jump in there. So I wanted to ask some questions about simple battery and physical aggression, because the simple part is what throws me off, and I think I'm probably not the only one, because simple battery seems like it's not so, it's not, but then you say physical aggression. To me, that sounds like a worse crime, but you're saying according to the assessor codes, physical aggression would be actually below, or not as, I say crime, an offense. It's not as serious of an offense. Am I understanding that correctly? Okay, and where some of this gets all confused in my brain is that, I've sat on our expulsion hearings, which thankfully we don't have a lot of anymore, where we had, because of our policy about laying hands on an employee, if the battery, simple, like even we had a student who flicked the back of a coach on the neck. I don't think that would fit under the assessor violation of battery, but legally with the battery, the definition is any unwanted touch. And so that student was going through the expulsion process. And so I just want to make sure that I have that right. And I think you included on a slide later. So there are some things that we would actually use physical aggression because it's a lower level infraction, right? That's what you're putting on the slide. Okay. So again, if I'm confused by it, it probably would be good when we to have those clear delineations of them side by side so people can see. And I'm not saying that our administrators will be confused by it because they get the training, but the public and parents and everything to know the difference between them side by side. I'm curious for elementary elopement, I'm trying to see if I can find the slide for each one of these. Where is it? There's 4? Is it on 4? No.
Move out of assigned area elopement.
Yeah. So, is that the right one? Yeah, it's on more than one, so I'm on the wrong side. So the idea that we have students who basically escaped from the classroom somewhere on campus or off campus, and so the consequence is we're going to let them be off campus. I wonder, what is it now? I mean, and now I know we actually are pulling kids back in class and whatever, and we have administrators and teachers and counselors chasing students all over campus, but what would be the trigger that would move a student who eloped? Because it is elementary, so it could be a kindergartner, right, who maybe didn't have preschool, and so it's their first year in school, right? They're getting used to being in school. What's the trigger that's gonna cause a student who eloped from an elementary campus or from their classroom to be suspended for up to 5 days? Am I not understanding that correctly?
The proposal,
It's on. Yeah, you just got to.
the proposal was to asking us to move from level 1 to level 3. So that was the discussion with the steering committee.
Okay.
And so we're just laying out for you that if we choose to do that, the only tool that we will have when a student chooses to leave class is to suspend them up to 5 days.
Yeah.
So again, if we want tools in our tool belt for various age groups and children, we would want to go with the left side of the screen,
Right.
or not honor that request.
Right. I don't see doing that where we move them, because we are at the beginning of the year. Like I said, we have kindergartners who are just getting used to it. If they don't have a tool in their tool belt, including redirecting and contacting their parents and all this kind of stuff, then that seems a little extreme to me. But at the same time, if we've allowed the first item, which is for repeat offenses, if it continues to be a problem and it's not something that can be dealt with a behavior plan, IEP, those kinds of things, then it's kind of willful disobedience type of elopement. I get allowing. So it seems like if we allow principals to move things up for repeated incidents, they'll have that tool in their tool belt. But I do not like the idea of making it automatically an out-of-school suspension if you are eloping.
It's only up to 5 days. Doesn't mean that it's an automatic 5 days, correct?
No, right, but it means an automatic out-of-school suspension.
But, I mean, and to that point, there are a lot of kids that take advantage of this and just go. And there needs to be some sort of an opportunity for that principal who knows. There needs to be an opportunity for that principal who knows who those children are to make that decision of up to 5 days, I believe.
Right, but if we do it, move it from 1 to 3, They don't have a choice. They have to do out-of-school suspension, even if it's just a first offense.
No, we
So-
also have kids that just should know not to go run off campus.
Well, it'd be nice if kindergartners knew not to do that, but not all kindergartners do. We gotta remember, we can't think about our own kids, so we gotta think about all the kids that we have. So like I said, I think that first item, that talks about repeat offended, principals can go higher than that, but they can't go lower than that. So if we move it from a level 1 to a level 3, the minimum they can do is suspend a child for elopement, even if it's their first time.
This was brought forward by the committee, which is our
Yes.
principals and everybody else asking for this, correct?
No, not for the steering committee.
Right, but in level, but for pre-K to 6, you still have in-school suspension.
Yep.
So you can do that, they're just wanting to move that up, so they have that choice. That just to give them more choices.
But I think also, I agree with you, if you have level 1, 2, and 3, where it's repeated, the principal still have the authority, they could go up to out-of-school suspension, because level 2 allows out-of-school suspension if it's repeated. If
Right.
it's the first time,
Right, and I guess part of that is I'm not understanding why we had to jump from 1 to 3,
that was the recommendation.
This was
Yeah.
All recommendations from the steering committee.
from our
Okay.
staff and the teachers and everybody else, that this is something that they would like to move to.
So, well, I'm just reading it the way is the impact, OSS up to 5 days. Okay, so if they're keeping them all the tools in the tool belt, and I think our principals and APs are reasonable people, I just don't want to hamstring them where they have to do out-of-school suspension for an elopement. We got to
Well,
give people some.
One of the things is my mic on? Yeah, I think it is. All right. Just for clarification, our elementary schools, all of them are offering in-school suspension or no? No. And I think that possibly could be part of a solution to these problems, is that if there was a uniform standard, that there must be an in-school suspension option, because let's face it, some of our kids that are running, they're running because they want to leave the classroom, right? Sometimes, or it could be a multitude of different reasons. But I don't know that saying out-of-school suspension is the best solution if they're wanting to get out of the class anyways. Do you see what I'm saying?
No, I agree.
Yeah.
I think if we had the option of in-school suspension available to all of them, I love the idea of taking away a lunch detention. I think that's a great idea. That's a privilege that they look forward to, and it's a punishment. They have to understand this is a punishment, a consequence to an action that they did. So, I had a question about this, adding the functional behavior assessment and the behavioral intervention plan. Who's going to be responsible for filling that out?
For every level 1.
Currently, anyone on a school-based team can do that.
Okay, and that would happen for any offense. The first one, they're going to get one of the, no? Am I not?
Just if you had one. So again, there's two paths. There's a school-based behavior intervention plan, what we refer to as the BIP.
Okay.
And then there's a functional behavioral assessment that's more formalized, done with the work side by side with the CBA.
Okay.
So depending on which one you had, the CBA and you would work together to update an FBA versus a school-based team could work just within their team on a BIP. So it's just saying we already know there's trouble or difficulties.
Right.
And we wrote a plan. And instead of consequencing them, we want to revise our plan to see if we can work that in a different way.
I got to tell you, I have great pause about this for a couple different reasons. And I think, we already see it where there's IEPs that are not fully followed sometimes when it comes to different things. And so I'm concerned that this is going to cause a huge problem for our teachers if we're going to come back at the district level and say, hey, we wrote this plan and now what's going on? You guys didn't follow the plan. Who's in trouble here? Even though the kid committed the offense, or the child committed the offense, I have concern over that one. And then does it stay with the student file for the duration of their education? I don't necessarily like that one personally, but I don't know where the board is on that.
Well, did I hear the BIP? Not every student can have one or will have one, but I did hear in place of consequence. So we could potentially have 2 students committing the same incident and it being handled differently, correct?
Depending on the kid's plan, every plan is different.
Yeah.
So a
But
plan
if one
might be-
didn't have a plan and one did, we potentially now have, and the emails will start to come, and the principals will start to say, we're handling things differently. And it could be looked upon, where did that kid come from? Where does the kid live? And the consistency goes away. Fear up here.
Right, I understand that, but I also think they just want that as an action, just in case. So not that you're not going to give discipline, but maybe you give discipline, and then also we start a BIP so that we're starting to track these behaviors, because the sooner we do that, you know, obviously we're able to get the behaviors under control. That was, you know, the dean said that as well. There was multiple people that said that, not just the steering committee, but they started it, that's why we put it there. But it was just as an action, not that that has
Yeah.
to be the only action.
But you did hear the same as I did,
Absolutely.
in place of consequence.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But
In
that
addition
wasn't-
to is fine.
That wasn't the intention behind it, just because I was in the conversation with them. And they just wanted that to say, hey, that this is something that if a student is starting, it's a, you know, just depending on what it is, should we start putting them on a BIP? Should they have another consequence? Yes, or no, just depends. But, you know, we should start thinking about these things.
So if I'm understanding correctly, so let's just say a student has a problem with tardies, right? They're going to get whatever consequence moves along for the tardy, but if there's, you know, if it's a pattern, right? Maybe we can put them on a behavior intervention plan where they're like signing off and we're tracking, hey, look, great job, you got to class on time 5 days a week this week, and it's, you know, so because that student needs more support with that behavior. I mean, am I kind of tracking how the tool is supposed to be used?
Can I give an example?
Okay.
Is this working? Can you hear me? So a good example of this, Ms. Campbell, would be, and it's not that they couldn't do this, I think this would just expedite the process for them and allow them to choose this as an option and make it happen faster. So for instance, in elementary school, if you have a student that is continuously, say a second grader or a first grader, continuously struggling with out of area, not meaning they're running out of the classroom, but just that they're out of their area continuously, they're running off the line, whatever. This would allow a teacher and the school staff to come up with a behavior intervention plan to address that specific need very, very quickly, that all school-based personnel that are working with that student know about it, and they're implementing the same corrective action continuously throughout the day, faster than it would be if you just gave them some kind of a consequence. It's just giving them the liberty to put it in place.
And that is usually currently happening through the MTSS process.
But it's slow
Yes,
and backs up.
yes. Same thing if you needed a safety plan for a student that, you know, really was exhibiting behavior that's not safe. You'd want to put a plan in place to make sure that kid, you know, had someone walking with him if that was a part of their plan, or they're not transitioning when everyone else is transitioning. So it just outlined so everybody can see it, who's dealing with the kid.
And it assists with documentation so that if something were to be elevated and and it's continuous, then we have the documentation. Here are all the strategies that we use to try to help this child, you know, use the right behavior and avoid the wrong behavior. So if we need to go farther, whatever the next steps are for placement or whatever, then we've got that documented in a way that, you know, that these things can be helpful too.
So what I'm hearing is that it's not in lieu of, but next to or running with the behavior. So if a child goes out of area, runs over, goes to a different place, or wherever these offenses are occurring, we decide to utilize the normal behavioral process and implement that, and then put in a behavioral intervention plan for best practices to be able to help that kid. Is that basically what I'm hearing? We're not going to do one in lieu of the other. Like, we're not going to say, we're going to give you a BIP rather than actually implementing discipline.
This process is usually done after the kid has committed a consequence, you
Good.
know, like you're given a consequence, but for the kid to make sure they're on the right path for success, to set them up, you've agreed to, you know, these particular
And your
strategies.
concern is that these things are going to be a lot of work, and if we're not consistent
well,
with doing it in every.
Yeah, I guess I have concern over that. I want to know, did you guys talk to teachers? Did you talk to to BFT about this, on what their thoughts are? Because what was their feelings? They thought that this was a good idea?
This was
Came out of the steering committee.
Okay.
the steering committee.
Which one? Because there was a couple of meetings that happened, so I'm
I
like,
know,
sometimes they were there,
The,
sometimes they.
This group.
This is the one that had
one of the
everybody.
interims with the interim soup. Correct, and that was.
But this is just an option.
That had-
This is just an option.
just a-
It's not like it's
Yeah.
required.
Right.
But we know best practices, if repeated behaviors, you want to get that under
The
control.
intention of this is to expedite a process that would traditionally take way too long in order to offer reteaching moments, modifying of behavior, and also for students where that's not working, create that documentation process to not delay correct appropriate services and placement for their students. And this, teachers who have to do this regularly actually would benefit this
from
happening
this.
faster, because that's how we end up with students who are in the wrong placement for 6 months of a school year and they're not getting the services that they need. And it's so frustrating for our teachers to have to deal with that because those kids aren't getting what they need. And that's when behavior increases as well.
As long as it's not in lieu of. a
Well,
discipline
and we're not
evaluation.
putting kids on BIPs immediately unless it's some type of egregious assessor, right? Or something that they're going to the ALC for. But if it's something they're repeatedly doing that you're trying to curb their behavior, that's when we're putting them on a BIP. So they're not going to do that in lieu of
Right.
giving some
it's
kind
not
of
a
consequence
permanent-
for their action, right? That would be in addition to, because that's something that's a repeated behavior.
Right.
Do
And
you-
to address your concern, it's not something that like goes, like they're forever and a day going to have this in place from year to year. I think that you expressed concern about that. This is, usually it's like a time set, like we're gonna over the next
2 months.
2 months, whatever, until either resolves or we realize, you know what, this student needs even more support.
So let me ask you this. Are you guys able to follow the board in the direction that you need for each one of these? Or should we go line by line and just say yes, 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 yes? Because I'm sort of, that's what I was feeling, like we're jumping around. So why don't we start from the beginning? You've did a great presentation. Let's just go line by line. Is this the first piece?
Yes.
So if we can do it this way, where I'll just say, okay, I'll read it real quick, and if you guys don't have an issue with it, we can approve it and move on, if that's okay with you guys. So the first one is repeat level 1 through 3. And remember, all of these come from the principals, staff, 1010, they've collaborated on this. This is a request by them. Repeated level 1 through 3 offenses may be advanced to the next level without the approval of secondary learning and learning. This was a massive thing that we approved on. I think it was December 8th, whatever it is. We're all good here?
Yes.
Good, okay. Move leaving school campus without permission from level 1 to 2. The impact and everything else, everybody okay with that? Good?
It looks like those two were already done.
Yep, just want to make sure that's what they were asking for. Move out of assigned area from level 1 to 2. Everybody good there? Okay. Entering bathroom or dressing area designated for the sex other than your biological birth gender. We're good there?
Yep.
Okay. Next one. Sorry, I know this sounds mundane, but it actually helps you guys just pound through it. Thank you, Mr. Reed. Move physical aggression, one-sided PK through K from level 1 to 3. We're good there?
No.
No, and I guess when I think physical aggression, just can we pause for a second? I mean, if somebody came up to a kid and pushed them, that qualifies as physical aggression, right? Simple battery would be that kid came up to another kid and punched him in the face. Now we've crossed over to simple battery. Am I understanding that correctly, or no?
You are, and a preferred method would be to have a lower and a higher level. So if we were to honor this proposal, we actually are limiting ourselves to much more aggressive actions. So if we leave it as is, we have those lighter pushes, and we always have simple battery to fall back on as well. So we currently have that range of 1 to 3 already using 2 different terms.
One of the problems we had was that Office of Safe Schools said that we had some variances where individuals were using the higher level of aggression and actually putting it down as a lower level of aggression. Does that make sense? They were defining it incorrectly, and there was a considerable amount of them. So what I'm hearing you say is that if we continue to do that, that may be the same thing. I'm trying to, because here's the deal. Like if a kid runs up and shoves another kid, there needs to be some sort of consequence, right? It just can't be, it can't be that we're just letting that go. So talk me through that, Mr. Reed.
Sure. So, I mean, right now from pre-K and K, it's currently a level 1. So if we look back, the level 1 consequences are in-school suspension. Okay. If we were to move it to level 3 for a K and pre-K, we would be putting into play in-school, out-of-school, and out-of-school 4 to 5 days.
Okay.
And so we would have to decide, if we try to say if you commit a level 3 incident, you get a level 3 action.
Right.
So we've really pigeonholed ourselves that if a kindergartner or pre-K pushes a kid one-sided, that's a level 3.
And
Go ahead.
And that in-school suspension 1 to 3 days is is also the level 1 component of that in-school suspension, correct? So that's level 1. If a kid walks up and just pushes a kid, you're going to have some sort of in-school suspension. What level 3 does is it gives the in-school suspension of 1 to 3 days. Am I missing something there? It sounds the same to me.
You are correct. And
Okay.
there are other options within there. We gave you guys just the most aggressive consequences that were there. There are other things within level 1. There's a long list of potential options that are part of those corrective actions.
This is one of those areas where, is this student to student, or is this a student walks up and shoves a teacher? Or is this still level? That's different. It's dealing
Simple
with staff.
battery.
Okay. And to me, the honoring that committee is okay because it's the same, but you're saying that there's a list of other things that they may be able to implement, and these are our PK through KT students, and this is the first offense, or is this just every time they do it? And then if they do it a second time, where's it go?
Well, that goes
Good.
back to that repeated thing,
Okay.
right?
All right.
And it really comes down to just like this discussion. We're
Yep.
discussing physical aggression, one-sided, what is it?
Yep.
And painting a clear picture, as Ms. Campbell said, side by side, simple battery is, physical aggression is,
Yep.
multiple instances of that lower level can be leveled up. And we just need to make that very clear.
Right, so I'm wondering if that clarity, then, Mr. Susan, that, one, we have a clear definition of simple battery, right? So we have these different levels that will be more clearly defined. And, we're not talking about simple battery, where like, the definitions over there with the examples, we're not talking about that only being at a level 1. I think I wonder if some of that more, better clarity will help with some of the things that were the complaints. Because if a student is picking up a chair and throwing it at somebody else, well, guess what? So that's simple battery. We're not talking about that in this, because that's a whole different category. So I wonder if that, with that and the other things we've put in place, if that's going to take care of some of the concerns we were hearing, because this is a different, but I would, especially for those pre-KK, I think we need to give, with the first incident, we need to, because there's still going to be some subjective, because the non-examples for the simple battery is horseplay, low-level pushing and shoving. You can't be on an elementary campus and not have some kind of pushing and shoving in line of some kind. But then it says possible physical aggression one-sided. So some of that's subjective, like how much, the teacher is going to report it, how much was kind of normal, oh, she bumped me or whatever, and so how much is actual physical aggression. So I think we need to leave it, as Mr. Reed said.
Is that, you're good there? You're good to leave it? Ms. Jenkins, or Ms. Jenkins?
I want to drill down and reiterate when we're having this conversation that exactly what Ms. Campbell said. These are not just our children, these are everyone's children. And we have kids who are coming in with little to no experience in a school setting sometimes, little to no guidance sometimes when it comes to curbing behavior at home. Unfortunately, it's a reality. We have kids who experience trauma, kids who have not yet been identified as ESE who are displaying these behaviors. And so my experience of working with our little ones, it's way too extreme to jump it at that point. We need to err on the side of giving that principal and that educator and that staff on that campus to understand what's going on with that kid and to give the appropriate discipline, especially because there is the room to elevate it if they feel that they need to. It doesn't stop them from doing so. But I do have a question. Why is it broken pre-KK and 1 through 6?
That was the steering committee addressed those that way.
Okay, because it's interesting to me because in all of the elementary world, that's just not how we do it, right? We do pre-K to 2 and then 3 to 6 because developmentally, that is the appropriate way to break those down based on research. So I'm a little confused by that, and it kind of sits a little weird and awkward with me. Having a kiddo going into 2nd grade who's the youngest of her grade, they're still fresh new little babies, right? We have plenty of kids who come into kindergarten who don't go to pre-K at all, and that's their first school experience. They don't go to daycare. It just seems strange to me that we break it up that way, because then it affects everything going forward. And again, if we have that conversation, ultimately we want our children to behave. Ultimately, we don't want to have to give them consequences. But we're also there to teach them and to model for them and give them opportunity to grow and learn and not stump them at such a young age. But if the school always has the authority to bump it up, my comfort would be to err on the side of caution with our littlest ones, and give them the room to start lower. Again, they can bump up if they want to, but give them the room to start lower for our little guys who still have that room to grow and learn and would benefit the most from a shared experience.
I think just to make a quick explanation, you're saying that you're saying it gives them the ability to bump it up, but in the event, you're saying that if it's more than just horseplay is what you're saying, because if you go with level 1 that we're speaking about, it does not give them the ability to bump it up to level 3. Is that kind of what you're saying? You're saying it gives them the opportunity to bump it up if there's more aggression than just horseplay? Or were you trying to say, because you were saying that it gives them the opportunity to bump up, I was just asking what that.
So, correct me if I'm wrong here. A student commits a physical aggression. The principal then looks at the consequence, which says level 1. Does the principal have the authority to move it up from there? Or do they have to have a level 1?
If there's repeated offenses.
Right.
They
So that's what I'm getting at. So for our little guys who are still learning, the first incident that they have, sure, it's going to be on that lower level, but then the principal has the authority after that, should it happen again, to take a more extreme consequence if it becomes a repeated behavior or whatever, and then there's a behavior intervention plan put in place. Not for battery, because that's a different conversation, but when we're talking about the physical aggression side.
What about a compromise? What about if it was, because I tend to agree with what you're saying about the pre-K kindergarten aspect of it, and some of our kids being their very first year in school in kindergarten, it's not pre-K. So what if we were to move that and just say physical aggression one-sided pre-K to 2, move it from a level 1 to a 2. They still have the option of in school or out of school depending on it. Because here's what I'm thinking, and I'm just going down like the worst case scenario. Say the kid's horse playing around, we say horse playing, they push another kid. And that would be physical aggression, okay? The kid didn't want to be pushed. But what happens if the kid falls and breaks his ankle or his wrist? So now did we just cross over from physical aggression to simple battery? Technically, no. It's still physical aggression, but sometimes, depending on what took place, there might need to be a heftier punishment. So if the kid's yelling and cussing and whatever else, and then just, wails out and pushes a kid, well, we're still physical aggression. We're not simple battery at this point. Am I right when I say that?
You are, but it might also level into being called something else.
I know.
That
This
could
is
be
where it's
vulgar
all.
language and carry a different level of consequence.
Yeah.
There's always.
But what if we looked at doing the move physical aggression one-sided pre-K to 2 from a level 1 to a 2, because it still permits the ability to do the out-of-school suspension if it is needed and warranted by that principal. They don't necessarily have to pick that. They could pick what's the other one, the other option? Sorry, I got to go back to that slide. In-school suspension. So they could opt for the in-school suspension or the out-of-school suspension. It gives them the option for either or.
So
I like it.
Sorry.
I actually like the breakdown like this because that pre-KK is, like we've talked about, that's the first year, we're still figuring out school. And I think most of those kind of actions we're having, if you ever look at it's been a while since we had, I don't know if you guys have seen it, like the behavior things, there's a spike in kindergarten, pre-K behavior, right? And then it kind of spikes again around the middle school years, as far as the incidence of different things. But I'm curious about this breakdown because it says, like the first proposal, move from level 1 to 3, and then the next proposal, move from 3 to 4, as if that's currently where it is. So level 3, so that's what I'm wondering.
That's why I was bringing that up,
in the
because
code
it's
of
already
conduct,
high.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense to me.
Is it in the code of conduct now for 1st through 6th? Is it currently level 3? And I can pull it up fast enough.
Thank you. That's what was odd to me.
Physical aggression one-sided is level 3.
For what grades?
First.
First to 6.
For everybody.
Okay. And I want to reiterate what the structure of our schools look like, our elementary schools, right? If you speak to our pre-K through, I'd say 3rd grade classroom teachers, they're going to talk to you about typical behaviors that happen, and they understand there are children that eventually get ESC services or a behavior intervention plan or whatever. But so many of those kids, it takes forever for that to be identified and that process to take place. The consequence of out-of-school suspension is not appropriate for a student where they may later be identified, right? So it's just, to me, it just doesn't feel right. We have classrooms in our elementary schools for our students with disabilities from kindergarten to 3rd grade, correct? Am I making that chunk correct? I think I am. And then we have our ESC classrooms from 4th grade to 6th grade. Just to me, traditionally, district-wide, typically when we chunk it, we're chunking it K through 2 or 3, and then 4 to 6.
I just found it,
Yeah.
and they actually, so if you look under level 1, it lists on page 62 in the student code of conduct, it says physical aggression one-sided, and in parentheses it says pre-K and kindergarten only, and then if you go to the level 3s, it has physical aggression and it says 1 through 6 only. So it was already broken down for that offense in the student code of conduct as the pre-KK and the 1 through 6.
Right.
So
I don't
that's,
know. I'm not going to beat a dead horse on it. It just, to me, being someone who works with developmental disabilities and delays and our youngest kiddos for years, this doesn't make sense with development of children. This doesn't make sense with our students with disabilities. Just doesn't make sense to me at all in an elementary school setting, jumping to 1st grade, going to a level 3. I understand that's where we already were, but looking at it on the screen, it just doesn't make sense to me. For a first-time offense, I think we need to chunk that pre-K to 2nd grade and then go whatever you agree to go forward. Again, not restricting the principal from making a decision going forward if they need to increase that behavior.
So are you in favor of what I proposed as far as the pre-K to 2, moving it from a level 1 to a level 2? Because they still.
No, because I don't believe, and this is just my philosophy in working with that age group, I just don't believe in an out-of-school suspension for that kind of a behavior. It doesn't make sense to me. In a later age, sure, absolutely, but for those little guys, as the first-time consequence, it allows that to be an option, and I don't think that should be the first option. If it happens again, totally put that on the table for the principal, but
Can you define,
extreme.
I apologize, can you define physical aggression one more time? What we use as the definition?
It's really the non-example there is what it would be.
but not
There's
automatically.
that's not necessarily the definition.
It's
though.
possible, right?
So it's subjective. It's basically.
So the issue that the other component is we're looking at the kid that's actually performing the issue, but the other component that we have to look at is the students who are that pain and all of that is inflicted upon, and making sure that the person that has that behavior exhibited upon them understands that the consequences are something that is right, because in some cases when we don't have the appropriate discipline and it just gets left on, it becomes part of the condition and culture of an area, and then it just becomes that kids can just kind of shove and stuff like that. So we got to be careful and give the principals the opportunity that when things get to a point where there might be a couple of kids that are shoving, it's becoming an issue, now we can exhibit. I like your idea, Ms. Wright, about going up. I would have no problem keeping it the way that the example was given, but if that's the way that we have to go to get to a consensus there, I think that that's good.
It's a board consensus. So Mr.
Yep.
Trent, where are you at?
Yeah, as long as we can continue to give building principals, the ability to be flexible. I don't care at what age. They're the ones that are in that building, and so I don't want to tie their hands at all. So, and I don't mind going from pre-K to 2. That seems fine, but to not, and we've had too many phone calls and emails and pulled off to the side to say this is happening over and over and over again. And even principals saying, my hands are tied. So if I can untie building principles for any of this, I feel that's my job is done here. So.
I just feel like some of those that we're hearing the most concern about wouldn't fall in this category. They are the simple battery that needs it. Is
Well, yes.
a
this is true.
different, so we need clearer definitions, clearer labels of that. I think if we go down to what this is, which would not be those cases where we're seeing those, the people throwing desks and all that. That's not in this. I like it as it is because one leaves us with that breakdown that we currently have with the pre-KK and the 1 through 6, I don't like moving it to 3 for those youngest ones. But I also don't understand why, like on the second line, will require out-of-school suspension 2 to 10 days pending investigation, which sounds like we're like getting ready to expel. Why does it require when the actual level 4 has a bunch of options?
Is that physical aggression or something going on there with the principals?
I think this is where, this is what's so frustrating to me about the corrective action. Honestly, if you go to slide 3, I'm like, a level 4 offense, again, I'm like, who's determining it's a level 4 now at this point, if it's, or a level 3, or, I mean, I guess this is where it gets just very complicated. I'm like, and why is a level 4 offense have the same punishment as a level 1 offense? It feels like the punishments should go up as the levels go up, right? So if you're committing something that's a level 4, the punishment should be heftier than what's available at a level 1. And
Can I give I'm not going to give an example of a behavior, right? But like, for instance, if I hate that we keep going backwards.
I know, it's
But,
like flip and flop and back
Physical
and forth.
aggression, if you were to raise physical aggression, which would be the shoving, whatever, to a 4, there has to be room and discretion for a principal to make a decision what is right for that child. So if you, I'm completely making this up, but if you have a 6th grader that never shows up to school, you're not going to want to give them an out-of-school suspension for shoving a kid. You're going to think the better appropriate consequence is to keep them in school suspension because that's a better consequence for that student. So you have to give the principal that authority to make that decision. It's not that they're going to passively get a gentler consequence. It's just that that consequence is better for that student and more appropriate. I can't think of another scenario, but it's, again, we're not talking about battery where they get to just stay in school. Every kid is different, every scenario is different, and every school is different. That's the fastest thing I can think of, because I can think of those students already.
And I can concur with that. You're correct. Every situation is different. Like, you could have a kid who's never been in trouble, and you can have a kid that is constantly. So that gives you options. Maybe this kid was protecting themselves, and so, they may not get that major consequence because this is their first offense.
It gives, for me, keeping it this way means that they can give the same offense that they give at level 1 or level 3 to, and it may cause confusion, like you were saying, as far as why is level 3 the same as 1. So I'm okay with going PK through 2, and then what is that, 3 through 6 for level 3 to 4, stuff like that. Like, I'm okay with that, if you guys are too. It seems like you have a majority of the board.
But there's multiple
Gotta
things
get
we're talking,
moving.
so we're talking about changing the the breakdown, but we're also talking about, are we going to go along with moving it from a
levels.
level 1 to a level 3 and from a level 3 to a level 4?
What does the board think about changing the breakdown? Let's start there. First one.
Okay.
Changing the
If
breakdown or leaving it
majority
the
of the
same?
board goes
I'd
that
rather
direction,
keep it
then-
pre-KK 1 through 6 like they had it, because I feel like that is a better,
Okay, and Ms. Jenkins, that's where you're at, keeping it pre-KK and 1 through 6?
No, I personally, I don't mind the proposal. Well, that's a lie. I don't like the ones underneath either. I personally believe that the first proposal should read pre-K to 2.
Okay.
And
then
I
the
think it should
second-
stay at a level 1. I don't agree with jumping to a level 3.
So no, we're just talking about the breakdown of the grades right now. So pre-K to 2, you're okay with and then 3 to 6,
That to me developmentally makes the most sense, but.
and then secondary.
So
I think that makes sense to me too.
majority.
So, all right, so we're looking at, and Jean, I don't know if you need like an official, how many said yes or how many said no to this.
Yeah, it
so-
doesn't matter now. It's at
4-1.
least
Well,
3.
we have 3 at this point, so I don't know where you're at, but,
I'll keep it there.
okay, so now we're gonna talk about the levels. So,
Did we just wait?
Yes.
We heard multiple things, not just.
So the first one to move to physical aggression one-sided is PK through 2.
right,
The second one moved to physical aggression one-sided is 3 through 6. Now we're going to get to whether we're moving them from 1 to 3 and level 3 to 4.
right.
Does that help? Sorry, I know that this
No,
is
you're
where we
good.
needed to
Thank
go
I
to get
know,
this thing
it's-
through.
I know, it's a conversation.
Can
so-
I, and Ms. Wright, I heard you on trying to find a compromise, but just hear me out for a second, because by lifting it to a level 2, it isn't a compromise, because now we're raising the offense for the pre-K to the kindergartners, where we agreed that a level 1 was more appropriate for them. So I would like you to think about that, because if you raise it from a level 1 to a level 2 instead of a 3, it's still now raising the consequence for those pre-K to kindergartners.
Mr. Reed, if I can just, again, answer, raising it to the level 3 still gives the same options as level 1. But it does give the levity for the principal to move to a level 3 if they find it, correct?
There's less options at your disposal. Again, speaking only of in and out of school suspension. So a level 3, help me, Ms. Bland, a level 3 does have in-school suspension, does have out-of-school suspension 1 to 3 and 4 to 5. It does offer all of those. But lower level corrective actions aren't as long. So the list for level 3 is this long. The list for level 1 is this long.
Right.
So there's options beyond in and out of school suspension that you lose when we called it a 3. We basically are saying at a 3, you're leaving class
Right.
at that grade level.
And I would say that, again, this is recommended by our principals and our teachers and everybody else to go to this level. So that's where I'm at. I'll now quiet down and let you guys speak.
Okay, I'm seeing questionable faces across the room when you're saying that, so I want to know why they're making those faces. But also, remember, you're talking about 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds who could just be shoving in a line, and that teacher decides you need a consequence for that. That's up to that teacher to make that decision. But that teacher can choose a consequence like teach, reteach, or whatever else is on level 1. But if you move it to a level 2 or 3, or a level 3, you are now limiting those reactions and consequences. So what I expect will happen, because we have kind, sweet, gentle, loving elementary teachers, they'll be less likely to address and write up those offenses because they'll be forced to make such an extreme consequence for it because it's not really appropriate response. They're going to feel that way because they're used to working with those age groups like I am. And or you're going to have kiddos who are getting extreme consequences that really just aren't appropriate for the action that they had. So yes, I hear you, Mr. Stevenson, on the slide that they showed us, they're the same, but they're not the same because you're taking away those other
Sure.
options to teach the little guys.
Yeah, and I would.
But I also want to know why you guys are making those faces.
My main point is that if our principals and our teachers and everybody made this as part of the proposal that we asked them to go to to come together to come forward with, then this is what the reason that I would support it.
Well, I hear you,
'Cause
but this, I mean, we're going to be looking at a lot of things, and staff's already shown that some of the recommendations were problematic. So I appreciate their input, but it was only some.
I was going to say, it wasn't all of our principals. was
Right,
it?
right,
I mean,
right.
If we were to move it from a 1 to a 2, like everyone is saying, that you're adding, you already have in-school suspension for the plant, for the level 1, but if you move it up and you're adding OSS, 1 to 3 or OSS 4 to 5, what this says is we have to pick something from that level, but we can also go back and still pick something from lower levels. So if it was moved up to a level 2, you pick something in level 2 and you still can pick another
Okay, let's go there.
corrective action from anything lower.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
you have all of
Thank
this
you, Ms.
and
Bland.
all of this.
Thank you, Ms. Bland, for
Thank
saying
you.
that. I think,
Yeah.
Wanted to-
I think the idea is
so that we all understand.
absolutely. Thank you for that. Are we okay with?
My vote would be to move it from a level 1 to a level 2, just so that there is the option in the event. And again, I'm thinking of the most extreme situation here is why I'm saying that.
But if you recall, we are adding for repeated level 1 and 3 offenses, they can move to the next level. So they could give something more severe, like a level 2 or a level 3, if it's repeated. So it's like that progressive discipline. So that if you left it at level 1, if it's repeated, they can pick from level 1, level 2, level 3.
Yeah.
Because
if we go
we've
to-
opened that up for
And if-
administrators to
and
choose.
if we move it to level 2, then they have both
Same thing,
options
yeah.
and they can still go there.
So
Okay,
hold on.
That's a good plan.
Because when we started this conversation, we all, I think so, all agreed that anything higher than a level 1 for pre-K to K was not appropriate. And then I convinced you all to change it to pre-K to 2, and now we're raising it to a level 2.
No, I didn't agree to that.
No, I didn't agree that it wasn't appropriate. So, and again, I'm thinking of the most extreme situation. I'm thinking of a kid who just is horse playing around, pushes a kid, and then that kid falls and breaks a bone. And I'm like, well, wait a minute,
Well, but what happens with the action of the child didn't change. What happens depends on where they were. I caution against that. But we just need to look at what the action was, what the purpose was behind it, because that's what those are the definitions have.
I think with them being able to have the options of level 1 or 2, and giving the principal the discretion to pick, because they can pick an option that's level 2 isn't going to automatically mean they're suspended.
Well,
No, hold on, I'm confused.
It will mean, or they won't? No, okay. Okay.
So just reading directly out of our student code of conduct, on a level 2, the principal or designee must select at least one of the following strategies from Plan 2. The use of corrective strategies from Plan 1 may also be used. So in addition to. So if we move it up to level 2, we say they have to pick something from out of here. So we are eliminating. We're not saying they can do level 1 things, or they can do level 1 things in addition to level 2. They can do teach, reteach in addition to all of these things. But remember, a level 1 does include up to 3 days of in-school suspension. So if it is that more serious type of physical aggression, they have that option as opposed to, sorry, I'm going to shove you for a second. Okay, Mr. Susan.
Yeah, but many of
Right?
our elementaries don't have in-school suspension.
Well,
That's
but
sitting next to the
some of them don't have like a separate room, but
They don't.
speaking as a person whose child got,
They go to the office.
they had classroom reassignment, so they had their in-school suspension in somebody else's class. So, you know, those things are available for those kinds of actions. I think, and remembering when the steering committee met, the steering committee met early on in this process, and I'm moving the wrong slides. They met early on this process before we had the new Sessor definition, which is going to provide them more clarity, before we had some of these other things in place that we've done, before the other meetings that have gone on, the May meeting and the June meeting that gone to get even more input. And so these are early on decisions that I think some of this we've been able to take care of in other ways. So now we're coming back to early recommendations that aren't as relevant because of some of the things that we're taking care of. Like the Sessor definitions, so, you know, more clearly defining the difference between what physical aggression is and what the simple battery is. So I think some of that took care of all this. So we're not, again, because we keep thinking about those extreme stories, but those extreme stories aren't going to apply to this definition.
That'd be a level 4 simple battery.
Right, a level 4, even for a little one, right? I mean, if a kindergartner is a big kindergartner and can pick up a chair and throw it at a teacher or a student, they're there. They're level 4. It doesn't matter if they're pre-KK. Okay, so let's just remember what it is, because we didn't have that necessarily tool in our tool belt, that clear definition. I think we're already taking care of it without going overboard, to me, on changing this from what it was. I think what we had a lot of is people coding things wrong and people not having that option they could go to for simple battery, but they do now. So again, strong recommendation would be to leave it like it is, which is pre-KK on a level 1 and 1 through 6 on a level 3. And we have those tools in our tool belt now to take care of those extreme situations that we were hearing about from November on.
So right now, we're working on PK through 2 from a level 1 to a level 2, and we have 2 individuals that don't want that. I'm in favor of it. Are you in favor of it, Ms. Wright?
So you just ignored everything that I just said.
No, I'm trying to get to a consensus because we're still on the first one and it's
But you went
3:15.
right back to what we were talking about beforehand.
Which
and
was
that's-
what we were arguing about and making a recommendation on. She made a recommendation. The argument is that. So I'm trying to see if there's a consensus for that, and if not, then we move to what you have. That's the process. Just because you made an argument doesn't negate what she put on the table, that's all. So I'm in
Right.
favor of it. I'm okay to move it from level 1 to 2. Ms. Wright, you made the recommendation. Are you still solid about that?
I am
Okay, Mr. Trent, are you okay to move it from a level 1 to a level 2?
Instead of a level 1 to a level 3.
Yeah. Because there's not consensus to go from a level 1 to a 3. I was okay with that, but it seems like this is the only one that, the next level, so that's where I'm at.
Yeah, that would be a minimum. Yeah, I would be fine.
You're good with that? Okay, so that goes from, so the first one is pre-K through 2, level 1 to level 2. The next one is move physical aggression one-sided. We're at now 3 through 6, from a level 3 to a 4. Let's have discussion about that. Open to the floor. I'm okay with that.
I would leave it.
Okay.
I would leave it as 3 too, personally. That's what
Okay.
I would do.
You guys, you have the
You
opportunity
would
to
say
go.
leave it?
Ms. Jenkins? I wanna give you the
Yeah, I mean,
opportunity to
and,
speak.
you know, Ms. Campbell, just so I can acknowledge that I heard what you were saying. So if there wasn't already a consensus going forward, my personal feeling, listening to where we were going, is I would have preferred to leave pre-K through K a 1 if it meant that everything else had to stay at a level 3, personally. Because it really bothers me that we now have 4 and 5-year-olds that are going to move up to a level 2. It's insane to me. That is absolutely insane to me. So, yeah, I just want you to know. I
Okay.
heard you.
Okay.
Back to this.
So now we're on to the number, so we all agreed that on the next one, which is move physical aggression one-sided from 3 to 6, from level 3 to 4. Now we're on to
No,
move,
we said don't move it. We said leave it a 3.
no, I said move it to level, to 4.
No, I thought we said leave it to a 3.
Leave it at a level 3.
We said leave it at a level 3. That's what we said.
Just want to remind everyone, simple battery is a level 4.
Yes.
So you
Doesn't
now have a
make sense.
lower level
Yes.
incident
And have the same.
that is a 4, if that's what I heard, and simple battery, which is a higher level incident, that's a 4.
No, I was saying, I think leaving 3 through 6 at a level 3 is sufficient. That's what I was saying.
Yes, and that's what Ms. Campbell said.
That's what the majority is then. Okay. All right. So that's a majority. All right, next up is move physical aggression one-sided secondary from level 3 to 4. I'm okay with that. Let's have that discussion. Leave it?
No, leave it at a 3, because then, again, now we have simple battery, which is for those more serious offenses that will be a 4.
Secondary kids. Should
Doesn't
know by
matter, though,
then
the
that you
action
shouldn't be
is
shoving
still
kids.
lesser. It
Right,
doesn't
they
matter about
should,
the
you're
age.
absolutely right, Mr. Susan. They should know by now that they shouldn't be shoving kids. And that's why if they commit that offense, we can't act like there's no, we can't act like there's no consequence because a level 3 is alternative classroom placement 1 period. That would be for some of these lower things, probably wouldn't see for this. Extended detention, financial restitution, in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension of 3 days, out-of-school suspension up to 4 to 5 days with leading and learning approval, but I think we got rid of that. Report to law enforcement, suspension pending parent-guardian conference. I mean, there's other things that are level 3. They're not getting away with anything. They should know. There's consequences,
And
okay?
it sounds like that's the direction. I'm okay with keeping it the way it is. It seems like Ms. Wright is okay with leaving it at level 3
I
at
am okay with
secondary.
leaving it at
Okay,
level 3.
and you have said the same thing, and I think, Ms. Jenkins, are you in that component? You would like to leave the secondary component to a level 3?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that that's the direction we'll go. If you guys will move to the next slide. Allow the principal to move up from level 1 to 3 for repeated incidences.
Absolutely.
We're all agreeing? Good? Okay? Remove out-of-school suspension OSS from level 4. I'm okay with that.
I don't understand
would
what
we
that
remove
is.
it?
Yeah, that makes no sense.
Just that I'm not really clear on that. Why we would remove it?
It was a suggestion. So now the only thing that you have is out of school for a level 4. So you don't have that choice to use in and out.
Oh, is that supposed
I
to say
think it
in
should
school?
say in then, right?
Because it says remove out of school
Yeah.
suspension from level
Oh,
4.
sorry.
Should say in school.
I'm sorry. Remove.
But I'm
out of
confusing because
school.
right now, level 4 doesn't have in school. It has out of school 1 to 5 and out of school up to 10 days pending.
And
And even alternative placement.
maybe you guys can help me on this. This is, why would we have out of school suspension 1 to 3 days, and then out of suspension 4 to 5 days, and out of suspension 2 to 10?
It's all over the place.
Instead of just saying out of school suspension from 1 to 10 days, or is it a different code? Okay.
2 to 10 is when there's.
Well, because even before in
gonna
level
expel
3,
them.
we had suspension 1 to 3 and 4 to 5. I'm just looking at, why isn't it 1 to 5? It's all different codes.
Right. And the 2 to 10 pending investigation is a very specific, like, we could be expelling that child.
Well, yeah, it
That's
just says
what
out
that
of school
is.
suspension 2 to 10 here.
Right, that one is very specific.
Okay.
It could be going further, in other words.
But it is to remove the in-school suspension out of level 4.
Sorry, I got jumped ahead. That was line 3. So if we are still on line 2, remove
Line
out
2.
of school suspension from level 4. That would mean our only consequence would be the 2 to 10
Okay, so you're going to remove 1 to 3 and 4 and 5.
That's what
Okay.
that's what was put out there.
Still got 2
Yes.
to 10.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that. Everybody else
That
okay?
means you're going straight to expulsion in essence.
No.
No. it's
Right?
two to-
Isn't
no,
that what that means?
No, sometimes they,
He's shaking his head yes.
It means you're doing an
Yes.
It means you're doing an investigation every time if they're put in out-of-school suspension.
At
Right.
a level 4.
but they
Yeah.
don't have to be expelled. They can come back on a 5-day suspension. They can come back on a 2-day.
But we're also then forcing them to have an investigation and when maybe that isn't necessary. So we're taking a tool away from our administrator who wants to suspend a student out of school.
No, it's
But
a
we're
level
forcing them to
4 should
investigate. Am
have
I
an
correct? Am I
investigation
interpreting that
every single
correctly?
time
That's-
Because it's a serious
Right,
offense.
because if that's what's left, that's what they're going to be doing, putting a kid on a 2 to 10
Yep.
pending
Level-
investigation. The kid's going to go out for however many days. They're going to do the investigation, bring them back at the time, decide if this kid is going to have an alternative placement.
And I think the reason behind it is, if I can remember this, is because level 4 is such an extreme case that they want to have investigations, and in some cases, there were not investigations on some of the level 4s, and that's what maybe that was doing.
But
That
that's
was,
their
that was
choice.
my, that was, yeah, but if a principal or somebody is deciding, if there's a teacher in there and they say, look, this is wrong, and there's no investigation on a level 4, those were extreme, that's what I thought when I saw that. I'm okay with it.
I'm not comfortable with accepting that proposal without really knowing the why behind it, and I don't feel like we have a good,
I don't feel like we do either, honestly.
strong.
Dr.
why.
Rendell,
Yeah, you're the most
as
recent
a most
principal.
recent building principal, I think we need some clarity.
Sure. To be honest, I wouldn't remove OSS options in level 4. I think what I'm understanding that, again, these are recommendations from the one steering committee. This isn't from all the different groups. They're going through the recommendations of that first steering committee. Now, it seemed to have the most stakeholders. Okay, but removing out-of-school suspension 1 to 2 days, 1 to 3 days, 5 days, whatever, as an option, I wouldn't want, you said earlier, you want the principals to have some flexibility and leeway to run their buildings. If you remove that, you have to do a 10-day pending, you have to start the process. And there are plenty of times where you have a situation, it's a level 4, it's a very serious offense, but you know you're not going to go recommend for expulsion. So why start the process? Why do all that? You know, I would want the flexibility.
All right, that's enough for me.
So the consensus of the board, from what I'm hearing, is to leave it the same and not move to out-of-school suspension
Yeah,
from
I
level
would-
4,
I would
correct?
keep
Yeah,
Yeah,
because
number two,
again, they're bringing these recommendations, these proposals, they may not be in favor of those proposals
Right.
themselves. They're just showing you what was
Sure.
put out by the committees.
So I think there's consensus on that. You guys have that? Yeah, to take that one out. The next one is remove in-school suspension from level 4.
It's not in there now, is that why there's,
For the pre-K through 6, I'm looking at it right now, the
oh,
in-school
I'm not looking at
suspension.
elementary, I'm looking at, sorry,
Oh,
I forgot there's a
so
second.
this should be for,
Do you see it?
So for elementary, it does have in-school suspension.
Again, I'm going to make that argument that there are different consequences that are more extreme to certain students and situations where that is actually a more extreme consequence for that kiddo than to send them home.
yeah, I don't think it's a smart idea to take away anything that they have available to them to use as, I mean, personally, I can't see why you would take away in-school suspension.
And I want you to think about like a 6th grader whose in-school suspension now puts them in another classroom. For some kids that age, that is absolutely a way more significant consequence to them than to send them home, that you just outed them and put them in another classroom. So we have to give those administrators.
But what are you doing to that class you just put them in? I had an incident where it was an elementary school, and the in-school suspension was to just give that student with the current behaviors in another 6th or another class. It wasn't much of a deterrent of behavior, and it was more of a that now I got a call from that teacher saying all they did was hot potato, and that's just the way it was. If it's a level 4 incident, there's many principals are not going to. They're going to take the path of least resistance and not have to hear it from a parent and just put them in another classroom, him or her.
Yeah, but now we have given the flexibility to the
Level
principal
4.
to move. I don't know. It just.
But if
that's-
it's not
that's
I don't
that's
necessarily
the
want that. But anyway, it's a level 4 incident.
Yeah, we need to leave it all the tools in the toolbox on this one.
Again, more
Yep,
flexibility,
more
the better.
flexibility.
More flexibility. on
Okay.
It's just going to shine, that spotlight on that
Right, but if
principal
we
even more.
see
That's
that
fine.
becoming an incident, then we can address that.
That's fine.
All
If we
right,
see that
so-
becoming a pattern, we can address that.
So that one, we are not gonna, strike. Move out of area elopement elementary from level 1 to 3, OSS up to 5 days. Keaton, I'm okay with it. If you guys,
No,
but
absolutely not.
Okay?
Okay, can we get let's make sure
Get
we're
more specific
understanding
here.
exactly what
Yeah.
that is going to mean. What does that look like, out of assigned area elopement? What kind of things could be classified as out of
Oh,
assigned area
Yeah.
elopement?
Elopement would be leaving.
So
the
if
class-
you if we made that level 3, extended detention, in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension, out-of-school suspension would be the choices that you have. If you leave it at a 1, you have many more options for any age child or from an elementary age child as an alternative corrective action.
And if it's a repeated offense, now we've given
Right.
the principals the flexibility to bump it up.
Can, just to be clear on elopement, does that mean, because again, you know, out of assigned area and elopement, to me, are two significantly different things. So is this a child who has left campus, or define elopement for me?
It could be that or out of the classroom itself.
But how would that not be out of assigned area versus elopement?
Elopement, I think, is off campus. 'cause
We
that's
have a
what-
leaving campus, that's, I think, on the next slide. And so we too feel that we're gonna need to better define those things.
Okay.
Skipping class and going to gym versus running off campus and running around the playground all day, we need to define those items
Okay.
better. But that's something we recognize right
I
now.
think a child that leaves campus, yes, that's a huge concern. That's a major safety concern. And so I think that needs to be a hefty punishment that goes with that. But a child that is on the playground or skipping class.
Well, it
and
used to
going
be,
different-
it used to be defined separately, differently, correct? Out of area was, if you didn't come back from the bathroom in 15 minutes, you're out of area. Elopement is if
But now-
you decide to go to the 7-Eleven and get a Slurpee.
I believe they're
That's-
still leaving
that-
campus.
that's-
That was
Three
still-
pieces.
Elopement means, like, for instance, you have a young child who runs out of the classroom and runs to the playground because they're being reactionary for whatever
Well,
reason.
yeah, they're out of the area.
Yeah,
They-
but you're still on the campus.
Mhm.
Well, you just,
That's
So,
what I
but
said.
why is that not out of area though? I mean, that's what I'm
That-
saying. I'm like,
that's-
you got to define those
that
two
should
things. I
be
think
a-
that they can't, you
Yeah,
can't
they
have
out
it
of
out of
area
area
should be
and
on
away.
campus, elopement should be
But-
off campus. That's an easy
Yes.
definition.
This is a elementary code, so I'm not okay with moving this from 1 to a 3. And again, I think some of this problem from this early committee that we took care of, because we're allowing them to be moved up for repeated offenses. So I think some of the concerns that people are bringing to us with this are going to be addressed by that. So I think we need to leave this, because it is such a broad thing, and it could be some small things that just need to be corrected, and it could be kindergartners and things doing that, to, you know, we need more definition before we just say, oh yeah, we're just moving it to a 3.
So, but here's the thing, in elopement, if elopement means leaving the school grounds, then yes, by all means,
It doesn't mean leaving the school ground.
okay.
Well, it needs to say that.
Well, no,
It can-
that's coming up.
That's a different code.
Okay. Leaving campus is coming up.
Leaving campus.
That's another one. It's coming
Okay. So we have, why do we have 2 then? Why do we have moving out of us? I mean, that's just,
So can I ask a question? So I'm hearing, and tell me if I'm wrong, I'm hearing that out of area and elopement aren't defined differently, but it's my understanding that they are, and in practice at least. And so elopement always meant leaving your classroom, like a threshold of some sort, or an invisible boundary, right? You run off the playground to go back to the classroom, or you leave the lunchroom to go to your classroom, or whatever. Out of area typically means you're still within the confines of that imaginary boundary, but you're not where you're supposed to be. And it's not as simple as like you're 2 feet off of the line, but Johnny's not staying in his chair. Johnny keeps hanging out in the corner of the classroom and won't return back to his seat when redirected. That would be more of an out of area.
that makes sense. But I guess, and if you can imagine, if the 5 of us are sitting up here having these conversations, how is a teacher or a principal going to know how to code something like this if it's not clearly defined? So I think we have to be very clear with what each one of these things means. I mean,
So I'm looking at our code of conduct. Leaving campus is actually defined by statute, so that's a different, yeah, it's its own code because it's defined by statute.
Come out of the washing his hands, you're trying to sit down. He's out of area.
So-
That's just where I'm like, this just crosses over all over the place.
Right. So you feel comfortable on the last one on the last slide for direction?
No, because I don't even know
So
what the
we're
direction
moving it
is.
from a level 1 to 3, or we keeping it at level 1?
Keeping it
Yeah,
at
move
level
out
one.
of area,
Keep it
Can you
level
go
one
back,
until
can
we
you go
get
back to it so that we can, or,
It's right
I'm
there.
sorry,
Yeah.
yes, I'm sorry, number 4. Move out of area assignment. Again, I'm okay to do that, but there seems to be consensus to leave it alone. What are your guys' feelings?
Yes, I would love for you guys to clearly define the 2. Because I believe elopement should have a heftier penalty than out of area. So I think that you need to separate those two? Because if I'm hearing Ms. Jenkins correctly, and she's saying that's a kid that's leaving a classroom or.
So
Sometimes it could be a
it-
student with.
yeah, so
disabilities
traditionally,
hasn't
Ms.
been
Wright,
defined.
it's like
Yeah.
trauma-induced students. It is not always, but often in the youngest grades. It's students who have trauma. So their natural reaction is to flee, fight or flight. And again, traditionally, these students would then be identified, get a behavior plan, and whatever. But it's not, they're not running to get off of campus, right? They're not, it's just a different intention behind the behavior, so it's not as extreme.
Can I tell you a story?
Yeah.
So you have a student who was sitting in an award ceremony who struggled academically and sat, and this situation doesn't happen anymore, but who sat time after seeing older siblings get awards and go up on the stage and sat through their first award ceremony and didn't get called. And someone who has an IEP, and when that happened, got very, very emotional and yelled at a teacher, and then ran out of the cafeteria where the award ceremony was being held and ran to the other side of campus. And bless her heart, the poor little counselor, who was not very tall, didn't have very long legs, had to chase that child down because he was upset. That child did get some corrective strategies and did have to serve time in another classroom. But do you want to put that elementary child in one of the situations of the level 3 and take those other options away? There need to be consequences, because that child needs to learn. You have to regulate your emotions and all of those things. But let's just stop and think, because it's so easy for us to start thinking about all these things, but there's lots of different reasons why. And when we take tools out of the tool, I understand we want people to be consistent, but we take tools out of the toolbox for our principals. I just caution us against that, because they are reading those student situations and needing to tailor discipline to what's going to be effective with that child. So I am not in favor of, and especially without the clarification of what these are, I am not in favor of us moving out of area elopement from a level 1 to a level 3.
Can I ask a quick question? Because it came up personally with my wife. Kids that leave campus, is it our standard procedure to allow them, once they're gone off of our campus, not to have staff chasing after them through the streets and stuff like that? Or is it our job we call the police, right? And that's the way that it's supposed to go?
For elementary students, like we'll just say at Gardendale, for elementary students, we absolutely do follow.
Oh, you follow. So like if there's a,
Right.
Blue shirt, jeans.
Right.
Still got eyes on them. Blue
well,
jeans,
and so
Main
that's,
Street.
so the issue that I'm saying is that there was an incident where the kid runs off campus and you've got one of our staffers running across streets and stuff like that trying to stop him, and it puts us in a very difficult situation. And that's not, I don't think, something that we should be doing. I think you should pick up the phone, call the police.
I've always been told that, especially with being an elementary assistant principal, that we need to do everything within our power to say, come back, you know. But you could force a kid, if you're running and they go in the street, so you could cause, so the attorney may want to weigh in on that, but you need to do everything within your power, not necessarily run behind them, but say, come back, Johnny, come back, we need you to, and then calling, you know,
Yeah.
for support.
But if they're
you
running
don't
off
wanna
into
win.
neighborhoods, you're not supposed to go jump the fence and
No.
chase after them across streets and into neighborhoods.
Keep eyes on them while we
Well,
call
yes,
law
yes.
enforcement, we keep eyes on them.
And keep saying, come
But
back.
but what I'm getting at is if they're out of sight from the campus, it shouldn't, right, it should not be the responsibility of the administration or the staff to chase after that kid
The
through neighborhoods.
expectation is the officer is gonna pick them
There
up
it is.
and
But-
bring them back.
Problem is they don't show up for sometimes because they're busy for 35 to 45 minutes. You got a kid running around, ends up at Target, right? And then we have that situation.
So I think Mr. Gibbs is going to weigh in.
Go ahead, Mr.
Yeah,
Gibbs.
I would not encourage anybody to chase somebody
Thank
into
you.
a dangerous situation.
Thank
You also have dangerous situations that could create liability for
Yeah.
staff. If staff's jumping fences and they tear a
That's it.
rotator cuff or something, now you've got workers' comp
That's
liability and stuff.
and that's what I was getting at is there's not a clear, like some of our people don't know that that's the proper thing to do and they go chasing after them. and it causes a liability. That's all.
Well, and the other thing to consider with this, again, with elopement more so than moving out of assigned area, is what about all the other students when a teacher has to stop
Right.
and chase a child? What about all the other kids that are sitting there that don't have a teacher now because of this? I had a PE
The
coach.
teacher cannot follow that child.
So that's
Yeah.
100% not what is happening in elementary schools. I had a
No,
PE coach.
they literally should not be doing that. Then the administrator needs to be redirected. That's not
But
allowed.
the reality is, when a kid takes off and they're radioing for help and no one's coming, what are they supposed to do? So again, that's why I'm like, these two things need to be separated. It needs to be moved out of assigned area as one, elopement as another. And I think that elopement does carry a heftier punishment because of the risk it is for, I mean, all those other students that don't have a teacher, or the multiple administrators that are chasing down a child. That needs to be something that's handled a little more harshly, I think, than.
So to summarize, I think what staff can take back is we need to take out of assigned area and separate it from elopement. Out of assigned area, possibly remain at level 1, elopement possibly have a higher consequence. We have to bring this back to you for approval anyway. So does that make sense? They can take that
Yes.
guidance back, separate the two, define them.
That makes perfect
Out of
sense
assigned
to
area,
me.
definitely in the elementary grades is a 1, elopement maybe a 2.
Yep.
And we'll come back with that.
All right, sounds good to me. Is that good with the consensus?
Yeah, well, Mr. Reed, you had said there's like three definitions possibly. And just so I can clarify, I can go home and I know.
elopement or out
It
of
sounds like out of area could be in the same classroom where Johnny doesn't go back into the area
Yes,
that he's
if-
supposed to
if
be.
they're not-
But if he
Okay?
doesn't stay in his center, he
Yeah,
gets
right.
leaving his center.
And then it sounds like then elopement could be he runs to the playground. And then the third one is off campus. Okay.
And any of them could be willful disobedience too.
Well, that's why I didn't understand the out of area in a classroom. That's usually, you're not, okay. So if we can get all three of those defined as a former classroom teacher, that's
That
new,
would be
that you could
great.
be out of the area when you're in the area. But that's fine. Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up,
Next.
add functional behavioral assessment FBA update or behavioral intervention plan BIP, BIP as a corrective action for level 1.
Are you guys in favor? Yes.
I guess we could be asking.
Can I, so I'm in favor of it because I'm assuming something and I just want you to make sure, I want to make sure I'm not making an assumption here. Can you explain to me how it would potentially circumvent the MTSS process and expedite a BIP being put in place? Because that's how I'm reading that.
This is for students that already have one, and you know lots of things that are going on, and they've committed a level 1 infraction, an incident, and you're choosing as the corrective action to add to the existing plan. I don't believe that it would speed anything up or slow anything down. It's saying, we've got a great plan in place, and this student committed a level 1 infraction, and we want to tweak our great plan to make it even better.
Okay, so I guess, so that's a little different than I was thinking, but I'm still for it. I guess, so a scenario would be, sometimes we put in place interventions that cause new behaviors, in which this would be the appropriate consequence because the professional recognizes the constraints in which that situation may have caused an additional behavior to occur.
I think we need to be careful that we're not saying we're adding to a student's behavior plan because
So, yeah,
as a
I'm
consequence
just
of corrective action,
confused.
we're making some changes to the existing plan at lower levels.
Okay.
Okay, we all agree?
Yep.
Good. Okay,
I'm
they
not
agree,
for
we
this
agree.
one, But that's okay, if you guys, the consensus is there.
I think it's another tool for the administrator.
Just an option.
So,
Okay, next.
I have to go to the restroom, so I'll step out for a second.
That's okay. Let's see how far, ooh. You guys want to take a minute?
Gosh, can we take a break for a second?
Guys, if we could take a 5-minute break, that's okay.
Okay.
Are you all good on that?
I say, let's see.
We're going to take a 5-minute break, recess.
Thank you. Sorry.
Welcome back. We are now on to the steering committee's corrective action recommendations. The first of these is to move the electronic telecommunications device misuse from level 1 to 2. I'm okay with that. Let's open the floor for discussion. I would also say, just so everybody knows, that we have a lot of other items besides what's on side of this presentation to discuss on discipline. So just so that you guys know, if we can keep our comments to a conversation and then move on each one of these, it would be good. So I'm making the recommendation to move from level 1 to 2. Let's have a conversation.
Well, I think we need to, that can keep this really short because the staff has already pointed out, we need to read the whole entire thing, including the right-hand side, which tells us that this is going to conflict with our own policy. So their recommendation is to keep it a level 1 with the tiers that we have according to our policy and according to our cell phone use plan.
Can we incorporate what you have provided for us, which I like a lot with the minor cell phone misuse? I think that that's a great solution that would that conflict at all? I don't think it would it? Or policy?
I don't understand.
On
the
page
question.
13, on the slideshow that she provided with, where it talks about the minor cell phone, it's the outline of offensive and corrective interventions. Because it kind of.
Mrs. Wright has gone further in the PowerPoint slides to your.
Oh, yeah, to define.
Well, no,
what
because we're
those
talking about
mean.
cell phones,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah.
Showed what you did in the other district. Yeah, so if we follow that process with our current policy, that would probably clean it up.
It would clean it up? All right, board, are you guys in consensus with that? If you look at page 13 of the slideshow, or the
Yeah.
slides?
Yeah,
it
I
gives a
think,
great
I
outline,
think
it
they're going to
lays it
ask
out.
us later on for that to go across the board for consequences too, and actions.
I have a question about the one
Okay.
on the bottom.
Yes,
The
yes, yeah.
financial restitution, is that just related to cell phone use? Or is that
No,
just,
no, it's just the topic.
what was the reasoning behind that?
Because it's weird.
And it says pending, so where are we?
We're removing it.
We're not sure what the rationale was of what, I mean, we're reading notes of meetings we weren't in, and we're not sure why we didn't want to potentially pursue financial restitution. So it was a recommendation that came out of one of those meetings, the steering committee, and we will write it in or write it out based on your directives.
Can you give me an example of what that would look like?
Well, the one comment that was made was that if we ask a kid to say you're going to have financial restitution of something, and then they don't do it, what can we really do? Like, can we really hold graduation? That was one thing that they said.
Or they owe for a textbook and we say
Correct.
that you're not gonna walk, you know,
So
for
they said if you really,
graduation.
right, if you really
If you
can't do
really
anything
can't.
with it,
You really can't.
why use it?
Paul? So,
I haven't looked at it. I wasn't in those meetings, so I would
but
have to.
can we legally withhold like graduation?
But we
or-
do.
I would have to look at it
Okay.
for sure. Yeah.
We make students not able to go to prom
Yeah, you
if
could.
they haven't paid all their, or go to grad venture or whatever, if they haven't paid their,
Yeah,
they
I
have
think you
overdue
can
things
have
from-
those consequences for sure, and I think you can even restrict walking. And that's a typical thing. But can you restrict the conveyance of a diploma they've otherwise earned? No, you probably can't. Would be my guess. But
Okay, so I think we have consensus on the first one, and am I hearing the second one and third one?
So,
I agree with leaving it in the tiers. I think that's what Ms. Wright said.
the
that's, yes.
recommendations on the right.
Right. And Ms. Wright wants to support going forward the specific definitions in the future slides.
Yes, I mean, I think,
I think we're probably all in agreement with that.
Approach in slide number 13 for those first three bullets.
boom.
Restitution, I think, the committee's recommendation was to remove that as a possible consequence. Again, it's another tool in the toolkit. We've had vandalism, and you ask for the perpetrator to pay for the cost of the vandalism, removal, that kind of thing. So, not sure why we would take that out.
Thank you. I admit when I don't know things, and I genuinely didn't understand how we would ever implement that.
I wasn't in the meeting, but I believe that.
Okay, okay.
So can we keep the, so
Leave
we
it
don't
in
want to
there.
remove funding?
Correct, we're keeping restitution
Okay,
as a
Yeah.
yes.
Nope, we're good. There we go. Add lunch detention from level 1 and
To
2.
level-
To
yes.
level 1 and 2.
I like those.
Yep.
I'm in favor of that.
Yep.
All right, we're good on add failure to serve lunch detention also, level 1?
Yep.
Okay. All right, we're good there.
Can I ask a question about that? I'm not against it by any means, but is that really different than an in-school suspension, or is in-school suspension only used for a totality of a day?
Yeah, I think this recommendation was to add lunch detention as a recognized tool in
Level
code of conduct. Like, I don't think it's in there.
Okay.
And so for tracking purposes, we would want, I think for tracking purposes, we would want to have that as you had lunch detention, you didn't serve lunch detention, now you've got this.
Okay. All right.
So-
Something more specific. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right, we're good there. Other actions, students will no longer be able to attend the ALC prior to hearing.
Okay, I have a question about this.
Go for it. It's on the
So
floor.
if I'm, to make sure that I'm understanding and for the explanation for our new board members too. So in the past, if we're doing a 2 to 10 day or while we're waiting on the official process to go through, we could go ahead and have kids, if their parents signed a paper agreeing it to, they could go ahead and start at the ALC while we're going through the process. Is that correct? And then, so what we're saying is they wouldn't have the opportunity to do that.
Can I clarify that
Yeah,
for a
please.
second?
Yeah.
That this right here came from multiple people because it's, yes, we have students going there and their days aren't being counted against them. However, there's a lot of issues with that. There's a lot of missed paperwork. There's a lot of problems that come with that. And so it's good and bad. That was one of the recommendations from the deans had a conversation about that, as well as people at the ALC, that, when you're trying to push kids through and you don't have all of your information, you have to withdraw them, you need a bus, there's a lot of things. So by the time you get them in, then you're going back to you're completing your hearing.
So what potentially then would happen is if we're waiting to see if a student is going to be expelled, then they could be home for longer than 10 days while we're waiting to get that done.
It's up to 10 days, so we should
Right,
be
we
having that
wouldn't-
hearing.
Yeah.
Theoretically, we wouldn't be able to keep them out past 10
Right.
days. Like, you have to wrap up this process within the 10
So it
days.
speeds it up, the process.
Okay, so is that the idea then to speed up the process?
Just so you have the right paperwork, where you're not undoing what was, the parent thought the kid was going to ALC. By the time they get the documentation, it's like, no, there was a mistake. So it's just cleaning it up that they're really assigned to that location.
And also, just for the student's benefit as well, if we have a student that ends up not going to an ALC, causing that shift in placement, and again, it's the word of the day, but it's true, another trauma of putting them in another location and then pulling them out and putting them back in their school, it's just causing a situation for no reason for that student.
Can I ask a silly question? Because I don't know the answer to it, but I mean, if we're talking about a 10-day process, what about, in that time frame, they're not in school? I mean, what about their absences?
They're considered suspensions.
Okay, so they're not, and those are okay to be I guess suspensions don't count as absences for students?
Well,
No, their absences.
They are.
Like if a kid gets in a fight, within 10, you're investigating, but you're not assigning them automatically to the ALC. You're-
Right.
No, I get it, but I'm just saying, as
Right.
far as like the 9 absences allowed in a semester, how does that play out in this scenario? It doesn't matter, or does it?
You have to apply for it.
Right, which is
There's-
why it's risky to elevate some of these things, though, because if a principal chooses a higher option of suspension for some of these minor infractions, it impacts things like that.
But this absolutely impacts the ALC because now we're a holding cell for not only the kids that are already there, but now we have kids there, correct? So that it makes it very, very difficult. And then we have kids that go there and then prefer to stay. It's, for some kids, it's just, it's like being sent somewhere you're not sentenced yet.
Right.
So we haven't said that you are guilty of
So
whatever
Ms.
happened.
Bland, you're saying that if students will no longer be able to attend the ALC prior to the hearing, that's a good thing because they're not impacting the ALCs in a negative way. And it's good to have them to where I understand 100%. I get it. I don't even think we're good to go. Good to go.
All right,
All
we
right.
got consensus on that.
Physical
Yep, let's go.
aggression, one-sided versus simple battery. I think we already had conversations around this. We
Right.
talked about it. Good to go. Next up. All right. First funny thing I'm laughing at.
to happen.
Revise referral to include previous administrative actions.
That's important.
I love that. Any argument? I mean, this should have been done, you know what I mean? So we're good here? Good, okay. If parent contact is logged on referral, automatically write into student documentation contact logs. Look, I think it's
Yeah.
great. All right, formatting change to discipline manual.
No, just kidding.
I'm like,
That's her, like, she likes to do that. Like, I swear she doesn't read them. She just scans it with like Microsoft Word and then finds it. Because it's like every meeting, I'm like, who does that?
Yeah,
Man.
I just went through it with the deans and the elementary APs, and we went page by page, and that's one thing that we did, so that's why we put that in there.
Perfect. There's some literacy teachers over here too. We could probably use that too. All right, let's go on to the next one. Develop charter for discipline advisory committee outlining governance. Yes. Where are we at with that? You
Just
have
your
it?
FYI, they made some recommendations of what that committee would look like. So do you want us to pursue those recommendations?
Would love that.
Yeah, so they're looking at, they're gonna
Have
look
this
at the
conversation.
data
That's one
each
of my
year,
things.
right? Of here's all the fences that we had, and here's the results. I mean, they're gonna look at it and maybe tweak and bring forward to the board tweaks from like what we did today, and say, maybe this one needs to move up, maybe this one needs to move down, add tools. That's what they're gonna be looking at, that detail.
Do you
Okay.
have a 15-member team yet?
Yeah, is that staff only? Like, what is this?
Come on, what is it? What is it?
I've done that, well, that's what I've done for even with Dr. Rendell, where we put it out, public notice. I mean, it's like anybody can come to these it's like work groups that you're looking at the data, you're giving feedback, and you're giving updates, and then you're bringing the recommendations to the board, and of course, the board gets to decide. In the past, I've started that process for some staff. In November is public notice for us to start in December. So everything is brought to the board early March. So we have it in time for our families and for everybody to know what the code of conduct, because you have to have it out for 30 days.
Yeah.
I love it.
So there is no 15-member committee yet. This is just the process that they would set up
They will set up.
if we were to pursue this, which I would recommend.
Yeah.
Would this be 15 staff members though, and then the public can come, or it could be public member? Like, what is this? Who makes up the team?
Well, the draft is 13 to 15 individuals. They must live in Brevard County. One would be a parent, a school board member each board member will appoint a parent guardian, no more than 2 members from Brevard Public Schools, no more than 2 members from BFT, no more than 2 members from BASA. So it's very detailed. I mean, you may want to lay eyes on this.
So we each get one, and there's
But
one
it's
from the union
diverse.
groups, stuff
And
like
you know
that.
what? Earlier in the year, I think in February, we were all asked to come up with someone, and then that kind of went away. So this would be
That is true.
because I was like, I remember coming up with a name, and
Yeah,
then
I
they
emailed the
didn't do
name
it.
over.
So yes,
Yep.
I already have my person.
I do too. Me too. If they still will do it.
How long until you can bring that back to us for full approval?
I would say August.
We want to get through the code of conduct,
Yes, one thing at a time.
but August will.
In
Because they won't
Gardendale
need to
and-
review anything because we don't have any data to start reviewing until after August,
Yes,
correct? Yep.
usually you would have that data.
We wanna
based
see
on
the,
August, September, October, you'd have it in December, January.
So
you'd have a
sometime in
section.
August, you guys will come forward with the recommendation for a charter along with dates that you would like to have them meet. That way we can do it.
Okay, I was gonna also make a suggestion, because I voted against the organizational change, but it's happening, right? So I also think something for us to keep in mind is the intention is for one of those departments then to be in charge of discipline. So, I mean, obviously, I think it's important for them to bring it forward so we can get on it, but I think it's also important for us to keep in mind and be cognizant and wait until we also have a staff member and a department functioning.
Correct.
To be able to be receptive to whatever's happening within this team, because starting it without that doesn't make any sense.
Yep.
Correct.
All right, I think we like it. Move on. Okay, we already did that. Should be
That's what
good.
we're talking about there.
We already went through this, right? Go on to the
Yeah,
next
well, there
one.
was
But I
a,
think they
the
want
next slide had
asking
a.
if we want it for all of it, don't they?
So on the last slide, when you're talking about option A or option B, this is an example of if we chose option B, then everything would be lined up like this, is what you're
Cell phone
saying.
bullying,
I
we
Option
for
B.
dress code, and I actually have samples here that you
Good.
can actually look at. whole
Love
samples.
Love it.
So our students, so this is for when we talk about developing our student code of conduct next year, or is this like administrative procedures off of our student code of conduct? What is this?
We had previously, this coming year, added to the code of conduct. And then part of that is training, specific training outlined for students, for administrators, for teachers, for bus drivers. It's consistency with the code of conduct, along with bullying, along with Title IX. There's a whole plethora of training that needs to take place.
I love it.
Yes.
Okay,
Love it.
that's good.
So the short answer is the entire code of conduct would look
Yes.
like this,
Okay.
would
Like
have
it.
pages like this.
Yes.
Love it. We're all good?
Yep.
All right. We have any other slides we need to go through? Okay. I think at this time, if there's anything that you guys have as far as individual board members in relation to discipline that we can have Ms. Napier take a look at. I have a series of things. I can start it off, or we can go. One of the things we talked about in our meetings is that the data needs to be housed in one central place and be able to be viewed, right? So I think we were using focus. The issue that we had was, and I'm just kind of preliminary laying it up, is that we had multiple places where some of this data was hidden, right? So you had workers' comp data from teachers getting hit, right? And then having that discipline, was that followed up? Then you had Cessor data that was in other, it was all kind of, you had the violations, you had sort of a description, but then there were all these outliers, right? You had Title IX stuff that was going on. There were some of the discipline may not have followed through on some of the things, right? So is there a plan to pull that all together?
I had a conversation with Dr. Rendell because we did something similar and put processes in place for all of these to track and trained on that for bullying, Title IX, what else? Cell phone, all of the codes, the major codes. But it will take some, we just.
It won't be ready for August.
It will be ready for August. We'll be.
No, it won't be. It won't be.
It won't be ready for August because, no,
make
it won't be
promises.
ready for August because we're just learning focus. But we're putting, that's our main problem, we're putting processes in place and we really got to work with ET and work as a team to get processes in place with that. It doesn't happen overnight. It really doesn't. It takes time.
So in the meantime, like, just to make sure that when a teacher is physically attacked, that we also have a successor, has it as a discipline issue. How are we coordinating? Because when I went to go make the request, she was like, well, our database doesn't have it. It was like, it was that antiquated when we did it, when I pulled it. So how are we able to, you see what I mean?
Yes, as
You're
for,
talking about battery on the school board employee.
shouldn't there be a code?
There you go.
You can
Put a
pull
code.
that data through Focus, but the problem was, it was new and we were trying to learn, because
Sure.
AS400, we had many double-digit
Yep.
years to learn that. So that was just the process of being able to do it, so that whatever data we give, you get the same data each time.
Yep.
So it was just a process of learning that, because I know tenfolds now what I knew when the school year first started.
Absolutely.
So that's all I'm saying.
What we had is some instances where the teacher may have had battery on them and didn't report it or whatever it was. So like I was finding that inside of those, inside the workers' comp, that some of those were not lining up with some of the actual discipline pieces. So if there's a way to check these to make sure they match these, that would be good. You have something, Russ?
Yeah, I was just going to add, some of this data is in the student information system, some of this data is not in the student
Yeah.
information system. The struggle is DOE is now also starting to build additional systems for threat assessment, Cessor. They're starting to build some outside, they're further separating some of this data, which is concerning for districts, because the districts want to understand when they say we're not reporting Cessor correctly, we want to see the data. But if they keep separating it and using different systems, it makes it harder for districts to
Right.
understand that.
So
So we
like-
are having those conversations from the technology realm with DOE, but it's a struggle because they're now starting to make additional systems, trying to get the fidelity that districts don't have in their SIS systems.
So what you're
I mean,
saying is that the DOE is also creating a variant of extra
Another system.
systems.
Set of
There's-
data points.
There's got to be a way that we look at all the data points to make sure that they check.
Yeah.
How do we do that?
Right, so what Mrs. Dampier was talking about is they created a system in Indian River that does all that. We're going to
Perfect.
do that now, it just won't be ready by August. But
okay.
with Focus, we'll be able to do much more than we could with AS400. It's just, we got to get our staff and get our stuff together.
And in the meantime, we can still go and pull the data sources and manually look at the stuff if we needed to.
Yeah, Focus has a lot of data
Yep.
for us, especially in discipline, that we didn't know we had available to us when we first started using Focus. Russell's team
We're
has
just
done a great
finishing
job.
year
putting
one. We'll get there, I promise.
Lots of reports available.
So if I have a situation that happens and I'm a teacher, I input the data into the system. Then on the Focus, right? That Focus referral goes up to the administrator. The administrator begins whatever level that is, whatever implementation that is, and records that. If it's a 10-day pending, that then goes out of the school for a review from somebody from the district, right? So like our previous one is that the principal would say 2 to 10 day pending and send it to like 14 or 12 people or something, right? That's what the previous one was?
Yes, sir, they still have to finish writing that, so that referral
Right.
is still there, so they're still
Yep.
gonna put the action code in there.
Yep.
They're still gonna put the OPI in, so all of that's still gonna be filled out, so.
Yep.
it's
And then
still-
it's sent to the district for somebody, and this is where I'm going, is somebody to review and say, this follows like, yes, we have the legal ability to do that. Yes, we have the legal, like,
Right.
where is that going for that decision to be made? Is that the org chart that we're going to find
Right,
out?
it's going to go into the chief of schools
Okay. Area.
umbrella.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll have somebody that's going to be reviewing those 2 to 10-day pendings.
Yep.
Got it. Okay. That's all. Because that was part of the problem we had is it would be sent to those multiple people, and then it was kind of just like, right, okay. All right. Does anybody have anything on data?
Yeah, I want to add to that and expand upon one of the things that you said, not at the end, that's a different string, but part of the issue with the data wasn't that it wasn't accessible, it was that our staff was hesitant to pull the data because it was a new program and our staff wasn't yet using it efficiently and effectively, and they knew that. And so they knew if they pulled that data for you, it would be deflated, and so it wouldn't be useful data. You can't make decisions off of it when you know it's not accurate if teachers weren't reporting their referrals or incidences in Focus. And so it's been a year since I've heard that response, and so I know that people have now been trained on it and they're using it more consistently. And then administrators, when they interact in Focus to that referral or incident, the teacher automatically sees that the administrator has been interacting with it, correct? Because that wasn't happening either. Okay.
So part of, and
There
I
was
would,
no feedback.
and I would be careful, because every single referral, whether it was being used in Focus or whether it was AS400, is supposed to be recorded. And that's the recordings that I was requesting. So it's not that staff didn't have a legitimate recording process. I was requesting data points from everywhere, from Cessor to make sure that Cessor backed up if it was in workers' comp, and if it was backed up into Title IX, and if it was backed up into those all should match. And what was happening is that due to data not being implemented correctly, but some other components, we needed to make sure that they're under one house. And that's what RSM and I were working on look, we have all these data points. They're not all linking up. We need to have somebody in-house in a centralized group to do that. So I appreciate you guys doing that. I appreciate you guys moving forward with that, Dr. Rendell, on your I think somebody needs to make sure that all of the data points are matching. All right, now, the next thing is that we had the offense matrix, we just did that. Did we feel comfortable with the discipline committee? We did that. We had an issue with parents trespassing on buses, violence in front of the front office, general behaviors on school grounds. We have no issue implementing, Mr. Gibbs, you may want to enter in here. One of the issues we had is we had school bus drivers that were driving. All of a sudden, a parent or a citizen would get on the bus, tell kids to get off. Then the police would show up, and the police would not even arrest the person that was on there. So it was not so much the bus driver who was just completely distraught. It was communications back to our SROs over making sure that the law enforcement agencies knew that if behavior like that occurred, that they have the right to trespass and arrest for entering. And we needed to get that to them to tell them that. There were so many instances that came up, videos over and over again, and if you need them, just ask transportation, where they were entering our buses and they were entering. The other piece is that there was situations where the car loop, where teachers, there's things that are happening inside the car loop, engagements, parents coming up and then violently, saying things. There's people coming into our front offices. We just need to be able to communicate to our law enforcement agencies that this is inappropriate behavior, and our staff to call law enforcement to make sure, and that our bus drivers know, you get somebody on there that is doing that, they need to go to jail. That's the kind of stuff that I wanted to kind of talk to you guys about, if you
Hey,
guys can
Mr.
give me.
Susan, these are a problem, but I think that's outside the scope of this conversation.
No,
I
this
think
is
it's actually
discipline.
outside the scope of student services, because you're talking about parent behavior. We're talking about the big people that we need to be talking to.
It's
This guy
it's
back here.
part of the issue that we had when we were relating to the discipline component. So if that's not you guys, if it's not your job to communicate to our bus drivers and our staff that this type of behavior is bad, then point me to the right, what would that be?
District security.
So we had this conversation previously, and Major Neal had addressed this concern already, saying it's absolutely trespassing. And I believe, Mr. Boone, correct me if we're wrong here, I don't remember who was sitting in the superintendent seat at the time, but I believe we did send out communication to reiterate to administrators, front office staff, and bus drivers that they absolutely have the right to trespass, and that
then-
their safety is number one.
And afterwards, it kept happening, so I
So
just,
I think one of the problems that we had, though, was that there's different municipalities, and we didn't have the MOU in place with some of our municipalities. Am I incorrect? I think that is correct. So we're cleaning all that up. Major Neal was fixing that, and I think now
But
our
this-
messaging should be uniform
Right,
across
this
the board.
doesn't have anything to do with the municipalities. So this was,
that's absolutely
Major
everything
Neal
to do with
made it clear, we need to reiterate it to our staff that they have the right to do that. If the staff didn't necessarily know or feel comfortable enacting a trespass, they have to initiate it. The law enforcement officer can't trespass somebody unless the person on campus says those words.
So maybe-
And so we have to teach our staff that that's what they're allowed to do.
So let's do this. Do we have it, just hang on, do we have it inside of our training for our staff that they know in parent and citizen engagement that is acting inappropriate what to do? Is that part of your training, or is that part of the district securities training?
Yeah, I don't think it's part of student services training. I think that might be something we need to make sure that administrators, building level administrators are aware of. Also, transportation, we need to make sure the bus drivers are aware. And we just need to keep working with law enforcement to make sure they know that we're going to pursue stuff like that.
Because one of the problems we had is that the bus drivers were saying we didn't know that in some cases we were allowed to. I just didn't know who needed to make that part of the training so that we can do that. We also had staff and administrators who didn't know that if a person comes in and does that in the front office, that you can have them trespass too. The other thing is that ISS at each school, Ms. Wright brought it up earlier. What are we doing as far as setting a standard of ISS and allowing each school to be able to do that? Is that part of this plan? Do you need direction from the school board? Because I think there is a overwhelming support for putting ISS, giving the availability at each school and making it uniform in some kind. Is that something we would do, Dr. Rendell?
Yeah, we would need direction from the board on that. I mean, that is a cost. We would have to devote a teaching unit to, if you want to, the secondary schools for sure, you'd have to devote a teaching unit to that, and teaching unit and an extra planning period, because that teacher then would need a planning period. So that's a cost. We can work up the cost for that. Also, we'll survey the secondary principals and the elementary principals to see if that's a tool they want at their disposal.
Sure.
You know, there are some schools that might not want that as a tool. They may not have the need for it as much as other schools. But
And I would agree with that. I just didn't want it to where they would not be able to move forward and didn't have the resources to implement that. And I think there's innovative ways that we might be able to do it rather than just having a staff member there the whole time. You know what I mean? There's because you know that ISS may be one or two kids at each school, and there might be an innovative way to bring those kids to a different location. I don't know. Like if it's okay with you, the board says that we would like to find some sort of solution there. If you guys can kind of put that together, are we okay with that?
as long as that's board corporate.
Yeah, I mean, the schools are creatively, in secondary schools, some of them are creatively funding that with different allocations, and it also has to do with space. You know, every school is a different situation as far as what space they have, and so Some of them, you know, and when you think about elementary, some of them don't need a whole entire classroom. You know, they just need a little
No, no.
sub-office
Might
or
have
whatever.
3
So
kids.
I hate for us to sit down and go, here's the parameters, everybody's gonna do it like this. I think we need to opt for the flexibility, but I don't think we need to, I mean, I don't have a problem with schools. Having that tool in their tool belt, but it's gonna be bigger than just, I don't know what direction we can give you today. We're gonna have to,
Well, I
have
think-
more information.
I think in looking at it, it's like this. You have some schools that I know for a fact are implementing ISS in a very effective way. They are to the point where they were communicated through some of the other principals. And I had some other principals that said we would love to do that, but we may not have the resources. So if there's a way to find out if there's schools that need resources and find best practices to do so, I think that this board would like to see that. That's all.
I'm
Yeah.
a huge fan of the in-school suspension as opposed to the out-of-school suspension. I think that that's a great tool that we should make accessible to all of
Yep.
our schools, honestly. So I realize that there's a cost with it. So I guess what we would what I would like to see is what does that cost? And how many of our schools would want to really participate in this and need additional funding for it? Or if it's feasible or not. Some schools don't have the space, as you were saying. So we would need to gather all that information before we kind of went forward and said, hey, go forward and do this kind of thing.
And then, and I agree with you 100%, are we okay with giving that direction, that in the event that there's best practices, we share, and if there's a school that would like resources, we try to find out what that cost is and bring it back to the board? Is that effective? Good?
I'm fine with that.
You okay
I
with
like
that?
the in-school
Let's
suspension.
tackle it.
Yep, that's what we're saying, if you're okay with having staff move in that direction. Okay?
Understood. Yep.
Yeah. The other thing is that we spoke about this earlier, doing staff, bus driver, student trainings, those kind of things, like, hey, what's the game plan? So like kids come back, and I know you just took over like 2 weeks ago, right? But like, what are the teachers? What kind of training are we going to get? What kind of staff for the bus drivers? And then what are we looking at for when the students and parents come on campus for the first time? What is that? You know what I mean? Do we have a plan? Are we working on that? What's going on?
Our opening plan?
We needed direction as to today. Now we know what we're going to bring back to the board in July, and we will have a plan outlined.
I want to say staff did an amazing job with the cell phone rollout, right? To communicate, to say all those things. So that's what I think effectively we were looking at to communicate all of our future disciplines and stuff like that. So if that's okay, and these are ideas that I'm just putting on the table, but if that's okay with you, I would like to see sort of a effective plan of action for implementing the trainings and stuff like that and what that would look like for our staff. Because one of the problems they kept saying is our bus drivers need trainings, and we just didn't have them. And now that we're bringing we got 66 new applicants, we're gonna need to do some training, right? So I think that in that case, I think that some sort of plan of action sometime before we open would be good, that's all. All right?
Absolutely. The communication that was done in regards to the cell phone, that was tremendous, and that really hit home. Everyone got the message. The same message was conveyed over and over and over again, and I think that type of messaging is very good for our district to create a sense of we're uniform across the board, so it wasn't different from school to school. So, yeah.
And then the last piece is that discipline process that I spoke of before, having some sort of a plan of action, which you said will come out from the Office of Safe Schools. Tied to that is what I think Ms. Jenkins really is passionate about, and I feel the same way, is that ESE identification process seemed to be some sort of a discipline nightmare, meaning student needs to be identified for their discipline or their ESE services. They're not getting the correct identification of those services that are needed, and they continue to have incidences where they are implementing a negative discipline that is towards their manifestation, but they hadn't gotten there. Does that make sense to you? Like our young kids who may have needs as far as autism and on the spectrum and all of these other components that need the services are not getting those those identifications of their services in a fast enough time. Like we have kids that are just going through a long time period and not being identified. Is there a plan to shorten that up or anything like that?
Can I jump in there?
Go for it, Ms. Jenkins.
That is a loaded question, and there's no fixing that. That is not a magic wand fix. That is community awareness problem. That is a ESE certified teacher problem. That's ESE staffing vacancy problem. It's absolutely a concern, but it's basically impossible to address at this point. It's something to always be aware of and to strive towards. But one of the most significant problems in our schools is that we don't have enough ESE staff to make that process go faster. And so step one would be recruiting ESE professionals to this district to ensure that they have functioning MTSS teams, because that's really where the difficulty lies. Unfortunately, most of those constraints that slow the wheel of progress are policy and statutory requirements and things of that nature, and there's really no circumventing that pause, unfortunately.
Okay, so it sounds like there's an opportunity to improve the process by finding if we need to have more of the ESC individuals to do that. There's also, I met with some teams in Orlando that were talking about how they do it, and they said that if they did it this way, which is the normal way that they go through the process, it takes months and months and months. If they do it this way, that it took like 2 weeks. So I'd love to just sit down with you and go through that process to see how they're doing it so that we might be able to do it to Fidelity, because it'll help our children get identified for the services that they need ahead of time to get moving. That's all.
Okay. What district is that again?
It was Orange County. It was in Orange County. There was a couple of them, so I'll be over there and I'll.
Yeah, my daughter's there too. She's
All right.
AP.
Okay. All right. I'll bring the facility and everything else and the individuals involved. So I just those were some of the issues that look, they were on my table. The data collection, the ISS, we're moving, I know, and I really appreciate you guys. I know that this is just like a whirlwind. You're drinking through a fire hose. Everything's happening so fast. But I know that there's an impending opening of schools, and we've got to be able to have something ready for them for trainings and everything else. So I really appreciate it. I'll leave the floor open to anybody else and the issues they may have that they want to discuss with discipline.
We have another presentation.
Yeah, we
Mr.
do.
I know, but we're on discipline right now. Just finishing
Well,
up
I know, but I
discipline.
mean, they've tackled a lot in this one meeting today. I'd kind of like to let Ms. Dampier and her team have some more time before we lay anything else on their plate.
So, are you guys okay?
Yeah,
We're
I'm good.
okay?
Thank you guys so much. We
All right.
appreciate the deep dive.
Now,
Good start.
let's see. I ran out of room. I was writing off onto multiple pages. The next topic, thank you, everyone. The next topic is the organizational structure.
Oh, because it's I don't know. It just normally doesn't do that. Normally it just opens it up. Okay.
All right, so the board may recall that during the interview process, one of the things I said I was going to examine was our organizational structure to see if there were some changes that needed to be made. And after I was selected, I said that I was going to go do that. Talked about it a little bit at the offsite a couple weeks ago, that gathered a lot of information, looked at a lot of things, and so was going to be making some recommended changes to the organizational structure. So here are 4 areas, 4 places where I got a lot of the information. These aren't the only 4 things that I took into consideration, but the first was the RSM discipline audit. There were a lot of findings in there that talked about duplication of effort, a lot of people having pieces of discipline, but nobody really owning discipline. There was a lot of work that was not consistent across the district. A lot of, they didn't necessarily recommend any changes to our policies, our code of conduct or anything like that. They said we need to be more consistent in the enforcement of those policies across the district. They saw a lot of inconsistencies and some mistakes. And then they also mentioned, since no one owns discipline, one of their recommendations was a cabinet level person that would kind of be a discipline czar. They didn't call it that, but something like that. So that's part of the organizational structure changes. The other is the paper put together by Dr. Cody, her assessment, her recommendations, her observations in the time that she was here. Some of it was curriculum related, some of it was operational related. A lot of it talked about restructuring. Again, the discipline was mentioned. Also, that in a lot of other districts there are principal supervisors, and she saw that in our district we had principal supervisors who also had other curriculum responsibilities. And she recommended in her assessment that we go back to a different model. Also, she talked about curriculum and instruction, the chief academic officer overseeing those 3 she talked about in her assessment 2 or 3 times, she made reference to 3 areas that really affect student achievement. It's elementary learning, secondary learning, and student services. And those 3 were kind of operating independently or not in concert. And so if there was a chief academic officer or something like that would oversee those departments, in her experience, her recommendation was, that would be a better way to go. Also started those one-on-one conversations with different staff, building level principals, also district level leaders here in the district and other staff members. And a lot of that feedback backed up what was reported by Dr. Cody and the discipline audit. And then also my experience for serving as a principal in the last 4 years here in the district, but also my experience being in the district here in the past under a different organizational structure, and also working in several other districts. So these were some of the themes that I kind of saw in my analysis, and talking to everybody else, reviewing. There was overlapping responsibilities. Discipline was one of them, but also curriculum. There were some things that, well, I do a little bit of this, well, I do a little bit of that, well, we do some of this, we do some of that. 2 things that are clear examples is the discipline. We didn't have a single person owning the discipline or a single department necessarily owning the discipline. The other one was a good example was federal programs. We've talked a lot. You've seen a lot of budget presentations now. We talked about it just a little while ago, that we have federal program money in a lot of different places, which is fine. And we're doing a lot of great things with all this different federal program money, but there's really nobody that has their eye on the ball of all the federal program money. There was a meeting that was called by Dr. Cody of the different people who have federal program spending authority, so to speak, that have programs that are funded with federal funds. And she said that in the meeting, it was apparent that a lot of people didn't know what the other people were doing with the federal money. So there were some overlapping ideas and well, we're doing a little bit of this and we're doing a little bit of that. I've talked to several people that were in that room that day, and they said it was one of the best meetings they ever went to because they learned so much more about what other people were doing in the district and a lot of duplicating efforts. And so we're using federal money to do some of the same things. So we need to kind of combine all that and put it all in one house. One of the biggest things that I noticed was this support and supervision of schools. It's something I noticed in St. Lucie County years ago when I was there as a deputy. I had been promoted to assistant superintendent and had some schools to supervise, but I also had stuff to oversee. And doing some research and looking at other districts, we saw that there was a better way to do that. Principal supervisors really should just be supervising principals. That should be their sole responsibility. They shouldn't have all these other responsibilities. There's actually research out there. Hillsborough County was one of the first districts to move to this in Florida, and they still do it today. And we put a model in place in St. Lucie that's still there today, where these directors, area superintendents, or area directors, area coordinators, in St. Lucie we call them executive directors of schools, all they do is supervise schools. The research shows that for them to be really effective, the magic number is 14. 14 schools for them to supervise. If they're in their schools, often supervising their schools, then they're also checking in with their schools. It's not a supervision or a gotcha. It's more like, hey, how can I support you? If they're in the schools on a regular basis, they know what's going on in the schools. They know what's working, what's not working. The principals have frequent, consistent dialogue with their supervisor, and that provides big dividends down the road when you're trying to support a school. So those were some things that I saw that we didn't have. So my solution was to realign some different things, change some structures, redefine who oversees what. We had leading and learning, and I wanted to separate leadership from learning or leadership from curriculum. So, we would have directors that oversee departments, not schools, and directors that would supervise schools underneath those umbrellas. So the example is, looking at our current cabinet, we had 2 positions, assistant superintendent for elementary leading and learning and assistant superintendent for secondary leading and learning. And it's really the positions that I'm talking about is divesting, separating, leading from learning. So my change is to eliminate the assistant superintendent of elementary leading and learning position and the assistant superintendent for secondary leading and learning position, and replace those 2 positions with a chief of schools and an assistant superintendent of curriculum instruction. Chief of schools is very similar to like a deputy superintendent, or we used to have 3 area superintendents. At one time we had 4 area superintendents, so very similar to that. So the chief of schools is someone who would oversee those directors who oversee schools. That would be their primary responsibility. That would be their area of work. The assistant superintendent of curriculum instruction would oversee all of learning. So the chief of schools oversees leading. The assistant superintendent of curriculum instruction oversees learning. We used to have that position in this district in the past. Assistant superintendent of curriculum instruction was a long-time cabinet position here for many years. And they would oversee the different curriculum departments, like we talked about, student services, elementary learning, and secondary learning. So if you look at the chief of schools, my plan is to have the chief of schools and then these 6 directors. So they would be by geography and by grade level. So as you can see, there would be an area director in the north for, the far north, so to speak, for elementary schools, an area director over North Central Elementary Schools, an area director of South Central, and an area director of South Elementary Schools. So this would cover all of our elementary schools. Each director would have between 14 and 15 schools, which again supports the literature, the research. And then for secondary schools, we'd have an area director of the north, an area director of the south. Right now, the breakdown I have of these schools is basically north of the Pineda and south of the Pineda for the different breakdowns. There's a couple nuances with the elementaries that they don't all line up quite like that, but that's kind of the breakdown. And then director of alternative sites. So Mrs. Bland, who's just here, she's director of alternative sites and discipline. We would be divesting the discipline responsibilities, taking those off of her plate, and she would just be supervising the 2 alternative schools. All right, so that would be, and the offsite, and the, she reminds me that it's not just the 2 alternative schools, it's a bunch of other stuff. But the idea is that all these directors, their primary responsibility would be to serve their schools. They would be required to be in their schools once every month. When we put this in place in St. Lucie, we followed the model that Hillsborough used, where the directors didn't just show up and say, "Hi, I'm here, what's going on, is everything good, what can you tell me?" No, they have a checklist, a list of data points that they would review with the principals, also some guiding questions that they would ask every time they were there. Each month they might have a different data point to go a little deeper into. So example, after PM1, after progress monitoring 1 assessment's done, when they visit the next month, they would sit down with the principal and say, "Let's look at your PM1 results. What do they look like compared to last year? Where are your hot spots? Where can we help you? Do you need support from curriculum instruction? Let me reach out to curriculum instruction. How are you doing with your new teachers?" That kind of thing. So I've seen this work in the past. It's very effective for principal support. You guys have noticed that we've been appointing a lot of new principals and assistant principals. They need as much support as they can get. This person would be there to support them at least once a month on a regular basis. That's why I think this is a great investment. So now the stuff, the departments, the curriculum stuff that our directors kind of oversee now, in addition to supervising schools, this would all fall under the assistant superintendent of curriculum and instruction. This is very similar to the breakdown that was in place in this district years ago. So you had an assistant superintendent for C&I, you have a director of elementary programs, a director of secondary programs. I talked about bringing all those federal programs into one place. So this would be a director of federal programs position. This person would oversee all those different federal spending buckets. We have a director of choice programs, but she also supervises 11 schools. By making this a pure director position, she would handle all of our choice programs, including all of the implications of HB1 and all the processes that we now have to go through with people filing for different buckets of money and that kind of stuff. Director of accountability testing and evaluation, we kind of have that now, but we'd probably move some more people in and under that, like John Carr might end up in there because he's our big analyst and that kind of thing. Director of adult and community education, we already have that, and director of career and technical education, we already have that. That's 14 directors. At first you might say, wait a minute, we only have, if you counted, there are 13 directors between secondary and elementary. But keep in mind that Mrs. Bland was over in student services, and she's one of the 14. So all of this restructuring is meant to be budget neutral. We're not supposed to be creating new positions without replacing current positions, rewriting some job descriptions and that kind of thing. So directors that oversee schools, and a chief of schools that oversees the directors and the operation of those schools. Then the curriculum side of the house, an assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction, and the directors that would be responsible for the different buckets. So what does that look like visually? This is our current organizational chart with the cabinet positions. As you can see, there are 9 cabinet positions. They're all there. Positions that look familiar. And so the recommended changes would be to eliminate these 2 positions, the assistant superintendent of elementary leading and learning, assistant superintendent of secondary leading and learning, and then replace those with a chief of schools and an assistant superintendent of curriculum and instruction. So the number of cabinet positions does not change. So budget neutral in that effect. Taking a look at how it looks further down the line, just like the slide a minute ago, now this chief of schools, they would oversee 7 directors, 4 over elementary schools, 2 over secondary schools, and then director of alternative sites. Again, theoretically budget neutral as far as the positions, okay? And then the next would be the assistant superintendent of curriculum instruction. It's just like the slide earlier, you know, these 7 directors overseeing different things. Now, theoretically budget neutral for sure. This will require some shifting of people and places. I want the area directors to be able to supervise geography. So eventually, maybe not this year, but down the road, we might have area offices again, where that north secondary director and that north elementary director may share some space at a place in the north end, or they might set up shop in an elementary school and a secondary school that has space so that they could be near their schools. So when they're visiting their schools, they can visit more of them more frequently, that kind of thing. So budget neutral in terms of salary and all that kind of thing, but when I start moving people around in different places, you know, there might be costs associated with that. But we're paying costs for them to be housed here right now. So again, this is what the organizational chart would look like with these new positions, replacing the 2 previous positions. And that's about it.
Okay. All right. Take any comments from the rest of the board members? Can go to, I always start with you, Ms. Campbell, so maybe we'll just go over to Mr. Trent. You feel like you have anything to say?
Well, thank you for all the, I know the effort and the thought. We knew what we were getting into. And we had all the candidates up and what they would do if they were fortunate enough to be in this position. So, you know, we hire because of experience, and I'm excited to see how this plays out. Again, we're the what, and you're the how, and again, I look forward to seeing how this plays out here in Brevard.
Ms. Jenkins, do you have something to say?
No, I already spoke about this today.
Okay. All right, Ms. Campbell.
Yeah, so I think, thank you for walking through the specifics of the plan. I actually, you know, one of the things you talked about how it used to be, and I know it's not, with the chief of schools a little different because we had those area superintendents, but one of the things that came out in discipline years ago was that there was some inconsistency, like what we're dealing with now, but in a different way, between maybe how certain areas were handling it. So I actually like the chief of schools because there is that one person that will help there to be that consistency from the north to the south. I think that's a better model, even better than what we have the area superintendents. So I think that will be good. One thought, just when you were talking about the potential in the future to create offices for these people, I mean, we'll kind of have to see how it goes, because they also each have administrative assistants because of all
Correct.
the things that and some of them may need to share, you know, or they currently share with other people. But we have that remote work policy that we just passed, and that's also an option depending on where they are, so that if they're visiting 2 schools, and it wouldn't be a cost effective for them to come all the way back to Viera in between, and they can, you know, do a couple hours of work at home, because we're allowing that remote work option, whether they're at home or at a school or wherever. I mean, you know, I think that gives some flexibility to those types of jobs. I can't remember if we put directors on those lists, but I think it would probably fit.
Totally hadn't thought of that, but that's,
Yeah,
We'll
there's
put that
just
in.
some options to
Yep.
think about in the future. So, but no, in general, I think this is going to be a good plan and a good streamlined way to do things.
Okay, Ms. Wright.
No, I appreciate you giving us the presentation. Obviously, I had the opportunity to sit down and talk with you about this ahead of time and see what the vision was. And it's needed, I believe, for us to do the exact same thing and expect different results. We know what that is. And so this change should be a positive change. I'm looking forward to seeing the other side of it when right now I know it's bringing uncertainty and some people are nervous about that. And that's just the nature of change, unfortunately. But I think once we give this model a try and we see the dividends that it pays, I think we will walk away and go, hey, that was actually a really good thing that we're really excited about seeing. So thank you for being bold enough to step out in this role. I know this, I'm sure it's not been an easy decision. And so I'm grateful for your leadership on this one. I think it's going to bring good things to Brevard County. So thank you.
So can I just address the uncertainty real quick? Because I know there are directors in the room and watching.
Yeah.
It's the same number of directors, they just might be in different seats.
Okay.
So my intent is to sit down with each of them and ask them what their preferences would be. There may be some directors right now that oversee schools and stuff, and they might say, man, if all I could focus on was my schools, then I'd want to do that. They might say, you know, I really like my stuff. I really like being in charge of X, Y, and Z. I do love supervising schools, but I don't want to give up supervising X, Y, and Z, you know, those departments, those curriculum responsibilities. Then we'll see, you know, if it all shakes out, they all get their pick, then awesome.
Mm-hmm.
If not, then I'll have to see, you know, who goes into what seat. But, you know, not replacing any directors or anything like that. The idea would be that they, you know, find one of these spots that to their liking and they're suited for, and we move on like that. You know, that's going to be, so that the director's watching and in the room, the idea is we don't want to lose you. We want to figure out which spot you want to be in. And if they can all
Thank
get
you.
that spot, great. If not, then we'll have to make some decisions on who gets to do what.
Thank you. I appreciate you clarifying that because I do think there is uncertainty with everything, and we don't want to lose any more of our people. There's no doubt about that. So
Right. Well, and it's been a delicate balance of sharing stuff with the board and directors and staff members. It's, you know, you don't want to share stuff with other people before you guys get to see it, but so they're seeing a lot of this for the first time.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Thank you.
I wanted to say thank you. I understand absolutely what the chief of schools, just like you said, and being in many of the other school districts across the state, the larger school districts have them, and it's a good because of the unification of everything. I absolutely love the breakdown of the regional, going back to having regional representation. I think in some areas that are square counties, the county itself is a little bit different, but we have a cultural difference from MIMS to MICO. And I think that each one of those is amazing. And having that ability to shine individually and having that representative in there is going to make some great things. And I think that that's been needed for a long time. I appreciate that. And when you talk about the offices, sharing some offices, when we first got here, some of the staff was at the Pineapple facility, and it's a beautiful building. And I got inside there. The roof's perfect on it. Somebody left the windows open, so it might not be so perfect anymore. But the issue is that there was just kind of this nostalgic of representing your local team. And I felt that in there. And I think that that's what we're going to get back to. So I love the idea of having people work in regional offices and stuff like that, because it means less time that you're here and more time in those areas. For somebody to report here to this building, then get in the car or have to drive up to MIMS or MICO, it makes it a little bit of a long run. It's windshield time, it's effectiveness, and when you're waking up every day next to the people that are inside those areas and saying, hey, this is what's going on here. You eat at the same, you get your hair cut at the same place, you eat at the same, you know what I mean? You're in the culture, and I love that. So thank you so much. I really appreciate everything you've brought forward. I absolutely love the one thing is that the citizens of Brevard County are over the top, and I know you put that in there. I really appreciate you doing that. Thank you. Dr. Rendell, this is great. Thank you. Does anybody else wish to say anything before we move forward?
Nope, let's get to the 5,000 policies.
Did
Just
you
kidding.
have did you have
No.
did you have anything else you'd like to say, Dr. Rendell?
No, I just looking forward to getting to work to put this in place. That's all.
Okay. All right. One of the things that we always end up with is I just wanted to run through some of the heads up on July 11th. Some of the things that are going to be coming up, just real fast. The 1,000s, just so you guys know, are now coming back. So all the ones we went
Right.
through have now been
Zeros.
zeros. Sorry, I was getting excited there, Paul.
Remember?
All right, the zeros are coming back, and we are going to do the 5,000s. All right.
I know, I was told.
I do want to take a second to say, Ms. Campbell, if you feel appropriate, maybe on the 11th we can talk about that challenge, because we got to get ready before school starts. Because you know what I mean. If we're going to be doing these physical challenges and stuff like that, I think, or whatever.
Dr. Rendell, are you in?
Oh, yeah.
What is the challenge?
This
Let's
is
do
the
it.
member.
To
She
be
makes.
determined.
She makes me and everybody. She calls me out because I haven't.
We are going to set an example for all
That's
of
it.
our staff across the district for getting
So-
healthy and
Okay.
being
She's
well.
been doing a great job, and let me reiterate, she's been doing a great job of effectively asking us to walk. And there's a pair of golden shoes in Gibbs' office just because he puts them on his dog and lets that walk around, and that's what ends up getting the steps, right?
Christ, Jesus.
So the thing is that I have not done a good job of effectively being a part of that. I apologize to Ms. Campbell, and moving forward, I said,
Okay,
let's put up
bring
this
it.
challenge of whatever the school district is doing, 5Ks and whatever it is, to promote what they're doing, right? So I wanted to say, if we can bring back that idea, the Campbell, the CC, the Campbell Challenge on the
Yeah.
11th, that might be
So
a
I
good
have
discussion.
SIAC tomorrow, and I'll see if we can't hook up some of our, because we have Cigna representatives who work here in the building. They work for us, and they lead a lot of those initiatives. So maybe they can work with them, and they can help
Yeah.
design something especially for the 5, 6, 7 of us. We may not include Paul because he'll probably win, but at
Maybe you
least.
can maybe get some of them to come in
Yeah.
too.
Okay, then we're including Paul.
You wouldn't know.
Yeah.
There it is. The other thing I wanted to do is we have the veterans groups coming on the 11th, where we're talking about retention, recruitment, some of the policies we have, and all of those things. I'll get a summary together so you guys know what it is. If you wanted to invite any of your veterans groups to be a part of it, it is a collaborative effort. The other thing is that the athletic policies. There's a couple of athletic policies. We were waiting for an athletics director to be in charge, and he's going to bring them back. There's like 2 of them.
Okay.
So you'll see those. Don't forget your Form 6. So
Already did it.
if you guys have not already done it, it has to be done this month, and it's all electronic.
Already
So
did
if you haven't done it, please take a second and do it.
It's not Friday yet.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to remind you guys because you may have forgotten. Yeah, well, let's just get it done. Let's just not get into the grace period.
It's just not early.
And,
I did
and
mine
then,
already.
and then the other thing is that we had spoken before about the cost of having us redistrict and stuff like that. I want to bring that back now that we've had the resolution and all that other stuff, and have a discussion on whether we are going to inhibitly pay for a portion of the supervisor's costs, or if we're not. As proved, as Mr. Gibbs had stated, there's no physical or there's no law that says that we have to, but I have a feeling that the conversation wrapped around what is good for governance and what is right is part of that conversation. So I'll have some of those stats put up, but I just kind of wanted to let you guys know what was coming up on the July 11th. And if there's anything else that you guys wish to talk about, we can. If not,
Mr. Chair, just to let the board know, we will be requesting an exec session on the 11th for bargaining.
Okay.
Some more discussion on some more
Awesome.
stuff.
So let's not go till 5 o'clock on the 11th.
I'll do my best.
hey
That
guys,
wasn't geared towards you.
great day. Appreciate it. Anybody else? Nothing else? That'll be the end of the meeting.
All right.
All right.